Okay, so, and thank you for the chat messages. I was on mute while I was organizing the room. In terms of, I know that some of you are trying to access the polling website and have said this, it says the specified session does not exist. I'm going to have to open that session, and I'm not sure how I'm going to, well, I guess I can do that while we're going through while Andy gets into his presentation. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do. If you will mark down, the problem is that I normally do this on dual screens. If you can mark this information down, which is the tttpoll.com, and then you see TH1001-2020 in probably 25 or 30 minutes, I will open that up. So you can then log on, and I'll also give you 10 minutes or 5 minutes. We'll take a break, and during that break, you'll be able to do it anyway, because our problem is operating two screens here and having two online programs. So I'm going to have to set that up for you. So don't worry about that right now. We'll come back to that. So with that in mind, we still are expecting a few more people in this room that I know about, but we are going to begin. And I do want to make an announcement. I understand that there was a beloved individual in the courts of bailiff who passed away, and that certain members, judges and some others, are going to have to leave at 10 o'clock for that. I guess it's a funeral at 10 o'clock. So a few folks will not be here. Because of that, though, we are going to change the agenda around, because we know that we have folks here like Judge Sheehan and others, and I want to make sure that they see one critical part of this. This will be recorded, so the parts that are missed, you can come back to. Judge Sheehan, the fact of the matter is that because we'll get to do the polling without you being here, maybe I'll change the questions so we can, but in all seriousness, sorry that you have to do that, and we understand that you will be leaving at 10 o'clock. So with that in mind, we're going to work quickly through this. This is the call to order. I will tell you that I'm not going to bother with the roll call because I want to move quickly. And the reason for that is we can see who's in the room, and I can see based on who has entered into the meeting. We know the steering committee members that are here. We are not going to be doing any determinations today. So we'll record who has shown up at the meeting and which members are here. I will tell you that, and I don't know if folks can see who's in the room here, but we do have Judge Sheehan here, Judge Russo's here, Mr. O'Malley's here. In terms of members of the steering committee or their advisors, Mr. Mason, who's an advisor, Judge Celebrezzi's here, and there's a few others that are here, but those are the folks who are either on the steering committee or their designees. First of all, let me welcome you to this meeting. This is not how we intended back in January to do the next meeting. Things have changed pretty dramatically. If you're not familiar with Zoom, there is a chat function, and I will be trying to monitor chat comments. You can, by the way, send messages to me as the host. You can send messages to the group or others. Right now, I have most people on mute. We will, at a point in time, I'm going to, as we start the presentation, I'll go through here. I do intend to take steering committee members and their delegates off of mute so they can make comments. There will be a comment section later on where I will see how this works, but we will allow other comment toward the end of the meeting. We will see if we can use the hand raising function. And we will be doing some very fundamental polling, just basic polling at the end, toward the end of the meeting. The other things I'll mention is there were some understandings that we had going into this session. First of all, this is about the jail. This is about population management primarily and the jails. We have agreed not to get back into the courts right now, primarily because judges and others who we want to talk to have been very consumed with getting back into doing their trial work. And we just didn't, they didn't, and we didn't think it was appropriate to take the time to do a lot of work on the courts. We will, however, jump immediately into that after this session. While there's no determinations today, we really do want to drive the issue of making decisions about the jails. And there'll be no decisions today, but we want to get the information out so we can get determinations made in the following week, or in the following weeks, I should say. So what we're going to be talking about here are what if anything has changed because of COVID, and we've had some workshops on that. We're going to talk about population management. We're going to talk about what investigation have we done on the jails since we met so many months ago. We've done significant investigation of the options for the jails, looking at things like operating costs, looking at things like construction costs, looking at programmatic issues and other issues. So we simply want to convey that information to you. I will tell you that any member here who's on the steering committee, before we ask you to make a determination, probably at the next meeting, we will set up individual caucuses with any of you. Zoom meetings are easy and get through information. Judge Sheehan, if you want us to have sessions with your judges on these issues, as in the past, we will set up any meetings that we need. We will, same thing, and to the prosecutor, we'll meet with you and do the same thing. I know that some communication has been rough, but we will try to get back into figuring out how to do this in a good fashion. So with that in mind, I have turned the screen over to Andy, and here's what we're going to do. Andy, if you can just go back to the first page of the agenda very quickly. We're going to do an update on the diversion initiative. Quite a lot has happened. We're going to do come back to the issue of central booking. Quite a lot has happened, but we're going to put that off until after 10 o'clock because that's information we can get to the judges. What we want to do right now on population management, but we want to move on to some of the jail information and data right now while the judges are here. So I'm going to ask Andy to launch right into what is Roman numeral 8 on this agenda. So Andy, can you take us through it? And let's just make sure that you are capable of going off mute, right, Andy? Let me try this again. Andy?
In 1 second.
There you are. No, you're fine.
Okay.
We can hear you.
Jeff, we'll just launch into the jails. The other information was background to this.
Hey, Andy, the other thing I'm going to ask you, I'm just going to tell you, get as close to the microphone to your microphone as you can.
All right, is that better?
Yeah.
Is that better?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, we're going to try to see if it can go through. Well, it's not on my speaker because this is in my headset. Okay, fine. Andy, go ahead.
All right. Thank you all. Well, we're very excited to get re-engaged and get started again. Today we're going to focus on the jail options, and as you can see on the agenda at our January meeting, which is the last time we met, the steering committee adopted options 2A, 3B, and 3C, all of which were based on a new jail on a new low-rise, non-downtown central business district site. Subsequently, we were asked to include option 1B, which would be to rebuild downtown and reuse jail 2, but plus expansion on an adjacent site. During the recent COVID crisis, the county was very, very successful in stakeholders in driving the jail population down. So the question was raised, could we just reuse jails 1 and 2? Or alternatively, could we reuse jail 2 and build a new remote facility? We have not studied those in detail as options, but we have prepared information to share with you. After we get through that, Curtis and Cheryl will just give a very brief overview of the program for the new jail, and then we will show you a comparative evaluation of a new jail under options 2A, 3B, or 3C versus rebuilding in proximity to the existing Justice Center. So with that, I'd like to first just very quickly go through what we prepared at the request of the county to respond to questions asked about the potential for the continued use of Jail 1 and Jail 2. We looked at physical conditions, what it would cost just to fix up the building, what the functional shortfalls would be relative to the program for replacement facility, what the operational and staffing impacts could be, and potentially what could happen from an implementation perspective. And Jeff, if you would please, can you make sure that Curtis, Ken, Jandora, Mike Wass, the rest of my team are unmuted to add commentary? Thank you.
Yes.
First of all, what would it cost us just to fix up the existing building? If you recall, as part of our scope, we were using the 2014 assessment study, which was very, very detailed. At that time, they were looking at a $74.17 million investment just in the physical conditions of jails 1 and 2. If we escalate that to today's costs, and these costs are based on starting today, we would be at about $105 million just to fix the buildings, to bring the buildings back up to some standard. Since then, we also believe we would need a complete update of security controls, and that's primarily about our ability to potentially impact operational costs. We also know that there are significant functional shortfalls, especially in the area of booking, intake, medical, mental health. A couple things that are not quantified, which would add additional costs. We are now doing much more robust mechanical systems in terms of filtering and ventilation, which would not have been part of that original estimate. And the original estimate did not really investigate to what extent hazardous materials could be present. So the bottom line is that with all the cost, we'd be looking at a cost of over $250 million just to fix up the building without any operational program or service delivery improvements. Curtis, comment?
Yeah, the existing jail really cannot be renovated. As I use the expression, it's not even putting fresh icing on a stale cake. It's just beyond really bringing it into any state of compliance with contemporary standards or best practices.
Some of the functional shortfalls are basically central booking.
Hold on, Andy. Bill? Now, Bill Mason has a...
I was just asking, why do you say that?
And let me just ask, I'm going to let you answer, Curtis, but I think you kind of jumped ahead because the answer to that question, I think, is the next 30 minutes of your presentation, right, Andy?
I could not hear the question, Jeff.
Oh, I'm sorry. The question for Curtis was, why do you say that? And why do you say that it can't be used anymore? And I think that the answer to that question is really the next 30 minutes of your presentation.
Yes.
So I'm gonna ask Bill to hold his question, but that if it hasn't been sufficiently answered by these consultants, come back to it. It's frankly why I want everyone here.
Yeah. And so
apparently, Curtis, they have not simply taken your opinion as being the final word, and we can move on. So we're going to have to.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Andy asked me to comment on it, but you'll see the presentation. So.
Hey, Andy, quit asking for comments until you get through the information. I'm kidding you. Keep going.
All right. So basically, relative to the program, there are significant functional shortfalls in the building. And the reality is, while we drove the population down to about 1,049, we were already back up to 1,450. So our population is still climbing. So we've lost that. Some of the critical issues operationally, if you'll recall, and I'm going to go through this very quickly, is Jail 1 actually has housing units that are half the size of what's allowed by standard. What does that mean? That means that just on its face value, it requires twice as much staffing as an equal amount of capacity would in the replacement facility. It requires escorted movement to recreation. It requires escorted movement to visiting and court, and we have heard repeatedly through the discussion that the access for attorneys to visiting to be able to do their business with offenders is limited because of movement. And finally, it requires escorted movement to medical. The comparison is with what we're projecting for a new facility is that all services are delivered at the housing unit. We effectively have larger housing units, which will reduce staffing, and we provide all the services at the housing unit, which eliminates the need for movement. So the bottom line is that rather than saving we have unrealized savings by continuing to run the existing jails. And those unrealized savings are $14 million on face value. And that does not include the analysis of movement staff, because we really haven't went to that level of this analysis. And even with what we estimated for court transport, without movement staff, we're still looking at an unrealized savings of over $12 million a year. And then when we think about it, other factors relative to new construction is we are at full capacity. So we're going to be working in an occupied facility, which will drive the costs even higher, which will extend the schedule. There's always a ton of unknown existing conditions in a renovation of this type. There's the probable cost for increased security during construction. And if we needed to vacate floors in order to accommodate renovation, we would have to find interim housing at a cost plus transportation. So relative to jail 1 and jail 2, to answer Mr. Mason, to support what Curtis said and respond to Mr. Mason's question, is one, we are looking at spending in excess of $240 million a year, which, as you'll see in a moment, is about 50% of the cost of a replacement facility. We would not realize any operational savings. We would not improve programs. We would not improve services. We would not improve access for attorneys to their clients. And there's no option for additional capacities except reopening Bedford or Euclid, out-of-county placement, or potentially another remote jail. And the historic cost of doing that was an additional $12 million a year. So there is no real flexibility in reusing those facilities. You have the continued movement of offenders, and beyond the cost of that, I think Rhonda would agree that there's an issue here of safety, security, staffing, and health concerns. One of the other things you'll see when we talk about the new facility is the jail administration has done a tremendous job of quarantining people into housing, but that basically denies them access to services. Simply because movement would be required to mix populations into other activities, whether it's recreation, visiting, video appearance, other kinds of things. So there are significant compromises in programs and best practices. And the reality is that even after the county makes a significant investment, you will not meet contemporary standards and evidence-based practices. We will not move the jail closer to the notion as what was in the meeting purpose, which was to discuss more humane, operationally efficient facilities for detention. So as your consultants, we do not believe continued use of jail 1 or jail 2 is in the best interest of Cuyahoga County and its citizens. Jeff, do you want to pause for a moment here for discussion, or should I just continue?
No, I want you to, right now, I want you to get through.
Okay.
Unless informationally, because I'm sorry. Go ahead, Judge.
One question I have is just during this COVID crisis, we were able to look at the population decrease in the jail. And one of the concerns judges have is when that jail 1 and jail 2 were built, it was a pretrial facility, a holding facility. Since that time, it became judges have used it as a sentencing facility. Municipal courts have been sending prisoners into that jail. Common police judges have been sending prisoners into that jail. And during that time, we started realizing that population as mixed, obviously. And the concern for the bench, I think the common pleas judges, is having a pretrial facility, meaning the cases awaiting trial being held in jail 2, and then building a facility for housing the sentencing facility, if you will. And I know that was an option you were looking at. So I don't think anyone in this room thinks jail 2, or excuse me, jail 1 can be rebuilt. But jail 2
Yes.
was the thing that I would just, the cost of transporting prisoners across the street or whatever. I mean, if we could put them next to the building where they're going to be tried, it would make a lot of sense. So I know that was part of the analysis.
We're going to go
hear more about
right to that. So and I want to make sure we do that while you're here. And so first of all, Andy, did you hear that? Andy, you're on mute. By the way, the most famous words in the English language in the last 6 months is "you're on mute." Andy, you're still on mute. Can you unmute yourself? I wonder what happened there.
Yeah, I think, Jeff, you have to unmute Andy again.
Don't know how that happened. I didn't. All right, try it again, Andy.
Yes, I did hear the question, and that is the introduction to the next potential reuse question we were asked to look at by the county.
Okay, so let me just for everyone's benefit, we did over the last several months, we did have some conversations with Judge Sheehan about this. This was not part of the original study, but it was a very good question. Can we use jail 2 as a pretrial facility? And really, the question is twofold. Can we use it even if we start on the jails? Can we use it short term, because for at least a while we know that those courts will continue to exist? And can it be used long term as part of potentially a renovation of the courts project? So this was something that we studied pretty extensively. And Andy, I now want you to, and this is what we refer to as a split jail system, because everyone understands that if you can't use jail 1, you still have to build something else or do something else with the rest of the population, because jail 2 is not sufficient. And by the way, you're going to find out it's not even sufficient for a pretrial facility size-wise. But we're going to have Andy now go through this in detail.
Okay. So we did a very similar analysis on what Jeff's introduced as a split jail system. And as background, we have worked with clients across the country that have looked at this issue. Could they keep the pretrial population downtown and do a sentence facility elsewhere? Curtis and I both worked in Philadelphia, where they went through an exhaustive analysis of this and finally made the decision they could not have enough capacity downtown for the pretrial population. Maricopa County, Arizona, the same issue, because typically, and you'll see, which it's true for Cuyahoga County, 70% of the population or more typically is pretrial status. While the jail is used for short-term local misdemeanor sentencing and currently does have the issue of ODRC transfers being held a bit longer than normal, jails typically are detention facilities driven to the largest extent by a pretrial population. So again, we'll start with the fact that the building itself, obviously jail 2 is newer than jail 1, but we're still looking at an investment of around $53 million just for the basic building core and shell with no other improvements. The real issue is looking at how capacity would be distributed. What you see in the upper right-hand corner is based on a 70-30 split, which historically pretty much matches what Karen developed in doing the projections. 70% of the capacity is needed for pretrial, 30% is needed for what the judge pointed out is local sentencing. So what that says, out of the 1,600 beds rated capacity, we need about 1,120 beds just for pretrial holding, and we need about only about 480 for sentenced.
Okay, and let me just say a few of the members of the committee I have permitted to unmute, but please go back on mute. It's so that you can comment and ask questions. So, but go back on mute if you were asked, if you were. And I'm going to try to make sure all the members of the committee have the ability to ask questions. I just want to get through the presentation a little bit more before we do that. Thank you.
So the current rated capacity of the jail, according to ODRC, and Rhonda was good enough to provide us with the most recent report on rating the official capacity, is only 472 beds, which means we'd have a shortfall in pretrial capacity of 648 beds. So even if we built a remote facility, we would still be transporting offenders back and forth between the pretrial holding to be at court and the remote facility. This is exactly what Curtis and I have seen in other jurisdictions, where you don't have enough capacity to have everybody there, so you're still in the transportation business. The other big issue is what needs to travel with pretrial offenders. First of all, central booking, intake, and release, because this is where the churn occurs in the system. And as we move to central booking, the part of this we did skip was the interim central booking in Harris County's experience. Central booking, reentry, diversion, all together with pretrial processing allows us to have better control over population management and move people in and out of the system quicker. Effectively, most folks that are in pretrial that can go to court, get some kind of release mechanism, need to be where they're going to be released from. So and right now there is no space available in jail 2 for any kind of central booking, which would mean we either keep jail 1 and adapt a portion of it for booking, or we build a new central booking center adjacent jail 2. The other critical issue is, and Cheryl or Judy, if she was on, could speak to this, is medical mental health needs to travel with central booking and pretrial, because most of the folks that need immediate care are the people coming in the front door. That's where we want to do immediate triage. We want to make a determination, do they need to go to a medical bed or an acute mental health bed or a detox bed, all of which are built into the new program. Right. And again, there is not space in jail 2 for that function currently. And in reality, central booking, medical mental health should travel with the pretrial population, not with the sentence population. Because the sentence population, as Judge Sheehan pointed out, is a more stable, longer-term population. The pretrial population is where we have the people coming in off the streets and we have the churn. The other critical issue that would have to be thought about, and I think, Curtis, virtually every jurisdiction you and I have worked in have faced this, is the cost of duplicating services. Do we build two kitchens, or do we build 1 kitchen and transport food? Medical mental health services, 1 facility will be the primary facility. We cannot not have 24/7 medical care at the other facility. It's just not allowed. Control functions and administrative functions become typically duplicated. Commissary functions are duplicated. Public lobby and reception are duplicated. Visiting and volunteer services are duplicated. And a critical issue is putting a system in place so that the public defender and the private bar know where their clients are in terms of being able to access them. Inmate programs would be duplicated. We'd have to have restricted housing in both facilities, which would drive up staffing and central plant costs. The other piece that, while we've talked about this as a way to avoid transportation, and I do understand the desire to keep pretrial inmates near the court so that if judges want inmate X, they can call down and have inmate X over there. We are not going to be out of the transportation business. We will still be doing court transport because we do not have enough capacity downtown if we stay at 1,600 for 70%. With 472 beds downtown, if that equals 70% of the population, we'd have to be down to a jail population of less than 700 to have all pretrial folks based on the numbers downtown. Medical mental health, depending on where the center is, we'd have transport for that. Depending on where central booking arraignment is, we'd have transport for that. and food service laundry. We'd have transport for that. All of these would have significant long-term operational cost implications for the county. And we would not save the staffing of the $12.33 million. We would actually, we believe, I'm jumping to the summary, that we have a minimum construction cost. We'd be bifurcating complementary programs and services that really need to stay together. We'd have a huge cost and operational impact from duplication. We believe the cost of operating two facilities would not save any money. It would in fact increase current operation costs and well exceed the cost of a new facility, even with daily court transportation. So that's our sense of what it would mean if we tried to keep jail 2 for pretrial. We'd still be doing the exact same things we would do if we built a jail on a new site, not adjacent to Justice Center.
So let me stop you right there, and I apologize because I'm working on unfortunately, I have to work on a one-screen system here, so monitoring the chat is a little difficult. And I did, and while I wanted to hold questions, I know that Judge Sheehan is leaving, so I did want to allow him, and I did give him that question. Are there, at this point in time, are there questions? And I do have some members of the steering committee that should be able to unmute and ask a question. If you haven't done that, and if you want to, send me a chat note, please, and I'll make sure. But are there any questions just from what you're seeing right now of Andy informationally? Mr. O'Malley.
Thank you. Andy, it's only been the last several years that the city, the Cuyahoga County has got into the agreement with the city of Cleveland where they take those prisoners coming and going on a daily basis. We're operating, is their drop-off facility. People then become arraigned in municipal court. They sober up. They're released in a very short manner. And obviously we have 60 plus municipalities in Cuyahoga County. Does it make sense that that facility is part of the county jail? Or would it make more sense if there was a consolidated municipal facility for those type of events?
I believe that's part of the diversion program, Curtis.
Yes, it is.
So
We're looking at a consolidated facility, Mr. O'Malley, for all diversion.
So you're
I
saying
wasn't sure I heard your
that
question
would be part
correctly.
of the diversion facility that the county is currently going down the track.
Yes.
Jeff, could you repeat that question for everybody?
Yeah, Mr. O'Malley, can you, do you want Mr. O'Malley to repeat his question? Is that what you said?
Yes.
I'm just wondering,
Yes.
we have this agreement with the city of Cleveland now, which given our facility appears to have been in a minimum ill time to take on additional prisoners within our county facility. We're down that path now, but does it make sense to continue down that path, or should there be a separate facility for municipal prisoners? Or, as you indicate, we are going down the path of diversion facility. Does it make sense to have the diversion facility constructed and see what the implications of that are on the population of the county facility?
Jeff, if I may, part of that would have came out in our discussion of population management. The city has driven their population down.
Hold on, Andy, what I want to do right now, go ahead. We're going to, Mr. Miller, we're going to talk about the implications on population management, but why don't you jump ahead and we'll justify the conclusion, but go ahead and talk about what we think we've learned on population management. Just summarize it. Mr. Curry is here, who's had a big role in talking about this as well, but why don't you talk about that and then its implications with respect to Mr. O'Malley's question.
Yeah, I wanted to make the comment that whenever the city signed the agreement with the county, they had over 250 misdemeanors in the jail every day. A couple years ago, that was down to 150. Most recently, with changes to summonses and how they deal with nonviolent misdemeanors and people that are cooperative on the street, the average daily population of misdemeanors in the jail is in the neighborhood of 50. So the impact of that on the jail in terms of the numbers we've been discussing is not significant. And secondly, as the diversion facilities developed, one of the things we added to that, and Curtis, I'll turn to you and Cheryl in a moment, in addition to mental health, in addition to substance abuse, was a detox center, which will provide the city with another opportunity for the kinds of arrestees, Mr. O'Malley, that you were suggesting could have a major impact on the population. Curtis?
Yeah. So I think, I mean, just answer also one other question that you asked is that this facility is intended, for example, the central booking area, it is intended eventually, and this is how other counties operate, to serve all the municipalities in Cuyahoga County. Not to say that, you know, some local municipal offenses might go to the local holding facilities, but the facility was intended to serve the entire county. Same thing with diversion. And, you know, there's medical detox, Andy just mentioned. We have medical detox in the proposed facility, the proposed jail facility, and we also have medical detox in the diversion facility. As far as, you know, numbers, and we'll talk about population management, when we did the diversion study, and we set a pretty high bar in terms of what types of potential offenses would be diverted, and this is at pre-arrest, before charges are even placed. You know, the maximum number that we felt could be diverted going forward would be at about 150 offenders, which is not insignificant, but you know, again, that's something to have to be worked on. So there hopefully will be an impact on the overall population once the diversion facilities get going.
Two things, and by the way, let me mention to steering committee members, from time to time, I've gotten a message from you.
Sorry, Jeff, is that 150 a day or 150 a month? What is that number? A year, what is that number?
Hold on a
You said
minute.
150 people will be diverted, and I don't know if that's a month, a day.
I believe that what he's talking about with 150 is a permanent reduction in jail population.
Correct.
Is that not correct, Curtis?
That's correct, Jeff.
Yeah. So it varies, but the idea is and we're just, you know, obviously there's other diversion, but just what will the impact be on jail population permanently? A permanent reduction of 150 from diversion alone is what the study shows.
We're going to go over that, Jeff, when we go back to the beginning of the presentation. We have all those numbers.
Yeah, there's a lot of detail on that. And by the way, that's conservative. You know, obviously, the better we do things, the better it can be, but that's conservative.
Yeah, that doesn't include bail reform. That does not include diversion after you come to the jail, because we're going to have diversion opportunities right at the central booking area, too.
Yes. Let me just hold on a minute. And I'm going to mention that once again, and this is our first experience doing this. And by the way, the next time I do this, I will do 2 screens so I can monitor. But other members of the steering committee, a few of you have asked to be able to speak, and I continuously do send an invitation to you to unmute. So you have to actually, when you get it, you have to unmute and put yourself back on mute, but then you're in control. So are there any other questions right now? And we'll have many more opportunities if we want to keep going through this. Other questions from steering committee members right now?
Mr. Applebaum?
Yes.
Mark Stanton?
Mr. Stanton, thank you for your participation.
Certainly. My question was, I'm concerned that the number 1450, 1400 is being thrown around, and my question was, I hope that that's not being used or there's an assumption or a premise that that's a constant number that will never go back down. We got to the number of 900 fairly easily, and not because everybody just started throwing people out of jail. Without being trite about it, most of those people didn't belong in jail in the first place. Secondly, we've got a couple hundred people in there right now that should be down in these state institutions, but ODRC is not accepting them. We could get below 1,200 fairly quickly, also with 80 to 90 people that need to get to counseling centers, halfway houses, a realistic number right now is not 1450. It's really about 1150. And with some of the things that the court is doing relative to bail reform, which is incrementally coming in, I think you're going to see a large reduction in the number of people that are inmates. I'm just fearful that people are just assuming that the number is going to stay between 1,400 and 1,500. And I not only don't think it's realistic, I think it's unfair to make that assumption.
So Mr. Stanton, first of all, I hope that the rumor of your retirement is not going to quiet your voice on these matters, and that you will continue even after retirement to participate. So thank you for that.
Are you pleased that I'm retiring?
I am upset that my wife saw that you're retiring, since you and I started the same year, and I'm telling her retirement is not a good idea for me. But that's another story for another day.
Yeah, but Jeff, if you're pleased that I'm retiring, I'm gonna reverse that decision.
Okay.
Well, then
I'll have to think about how to respond to that, because we do want your continued participation. So maybe I'll say I'm pleased with your retiring, just so you participate.
Very good.
Jeff, relative to Mr. Stanton's question, if I may, we will be going back to that. That is a question for the steering committee. The steering committee made a determination early in this process that the projection for planning would be a jail of 1,600 beds with an average daily population or operational capacity of 1,350. That was why we had early in this agenda a discussion of population management, because eventually the steering committee will be asked to revisit that determination and give the planning team direction as to whether we should continue on that capacity as a basis for planning, or it should in fact be adjusted.
So let me just mention this, and once again, we're going to do this after 10 o'clock because we can't do everything right now. We had a workshop. So what we did is we said, okay, let's look at why the population went down. Let's look at all the factors as to why it went down. Which of those are sustainable? Which of those are not sustainable? What do we expect to happen with the population? And by the way, which of those were a one-time effort that unless we do something institutionally, it still is going to go back up, because we haven't really done the fundamental things we always said we were going to do. We did them on a one-time basis, but maybe not, not sustainably. So what we did is we went through that investigation. We do have opinions by several who were in that workshop. We're going to present to you an analysis of what we are hearing. And then the question is going to be, for planning purposes, what numbers should we use? But here's the one thing I would like right now for Andy and Curtis to comment on. If we actually get that number down from, a anticipated daily population of 1,350, which is already lower than what we have, because that's what 1,600 implies, right? If we got it down, let's say to 1,100, would it change the view on whether we renovate the jail, on whether we go to a split jail system, or whether we still do a new jail? Does the lessening of the population actually indicate that there is a difference in where we go? And Andy and Chris, I want you to address that.
Well, I just one comment, Jeff, is that we're still not going to have enough capacity even with jail 2 remaining. So we still need to have a second facility someplace, whether it's adjacent or some remote location, not remote, but not downtown. We still need that, and the services, as we said earlier, such as medical mental health, which are very specially designed types of spaces, cannot exist. Jail 2 cannot be renovated for that type of space. I'm glad someone said earlier the jail won't, jail 1 is really beyond, or I think Judge Sheehan, you said it will not be in the mix, but even jail 2, which potentially could, and we'll talk about that in a minute, would not, cannot serve that type of population. So we still will need a second facility, even if we get the population down to an average of 1,150, like Mr. Stanton suggested.
Okay, hold on. Go ahead.
Jeff, if I may, since you asked me to comment, I would remind everybody that the 1,350 is an operational capacity or population is 50% of what the higher numbers have been historically in Cuyahoga. So we already set a very, very aggressive goal for population reduction. Ideally, we can get lower than that. I would certainly support that, through the kinds of initiatives Mr. Stanton has
Absolutely.
mentioned. We still would provide better services, better programs, address the issues we've had with ligature and self-harm, provide a better operating facility in a new facility. And regardless of what the decision is, it's going to take 3 to 4 years to develop an answer, whether that answer is renovation, build downtown, or build new. During that time, we can make decisions to downsize construction and not build 1,600 beds if we see those kinds of sustained improvements, which was part of our earlier discussion in this presentation, which we skipped over. So
Okay.
we've always talked about flexibility to expand. There's also flexibility to contract before it's built. We've done a lot of things with clients where there's been alternates that would remove a housing pod rather than add a housing pod.
Okay, there have been, and I will just say, I've been sending messages to Mr. Gallagher and Trevor to unmute because I think they've been trying to ask a question. You have to respond to the ask to unmute, and I'm going to see if either Trevor or Mr. Gallagher can unmute their phones because I've been trying to give you that opportunity the entire meeting. I'm not sure what's going on.
Jeff, I've been on off mute, but I know Councilman Gallagher had a question and he wasn't able to ask at the time. So I don't know if he is still on at this time, but he was trying to ask a question earlier when Andy was presenting.
Okay, well, once again, I'll tell everyone, you do get a message that you have to respond to. So a message goes to you, it says ask to unmute, and then you unmute. So that's what you need to do. So if you get a message to him, if he can unmute or get the question to you, we certainly don't want there to be a question that's unanswered here. Okay? I don't want to be seen as a bad host. So just want to get that message to you. Okay, why don't we continue on, and we will come back to the population management issue. Andy.
Curtis and Cheryl, we're going to give a very brief overview of the program so we can get to the options. Again, our key objectives, we based this on the determination of 1,600 bed rated, 1,350 operational, future expansion to be planned for just in case we couldn't get there, because we did not have the COVID experience to rely on at that point in time. Curtis, you want to pick up from this and run through this?
Yeah, so again, this is where we left off, and this is where we are right now today. We'll see where, that may change. But again, we were designing the core so it could expand, but we would definitely not do that until time pointed out that it needed to be expanded. The primary changes would be really service deliveries at the housing units. We want to create a more staff efficient facility. Right now in the current jails, everything has to be escorted essentially off the housing units. The new housing would not be that way at all. All the services are right on the unit, the recreation's on the unit, program services, counseling services, visiting access, everything is on the units itself. So we would have a decentralized system. And we would co-locate all the medical services with medical housing in an appropriate space, which we don't have today. Again, we would have a central booking area that would be radically different. It's the interim booking that we're about to embark on is a miniature version of it, but this would be much larger with robust pretrial services, robust diversion capabilities, even after the point of arrest. And we'd have appropriate parking for all the staff visitors and official visitors, as well as the appropriate space for them to be able to come in the jail in a dignified manner and be able to visit and with the inmates in the facility.
And then in February, we did do a workshop with Rhonda Gibson and the deputy wardens about visioning what the future could be. Went through a lot of critical issues. They identified some things that were really key. Quality of environment's important. Emergency evacuation's important. Actually, during the recent events that were created by social justice, real concern about what they would do if they had to evacuate the jail. A low rise preferred over a high rise because of staffing and flexibility and other implications. And we also adjusted some of our clustering. And I think the clustering is key because even if we have a jail of 1,350 offenders or less, the question is how we define that in terms of span of control for administration and management. And that's where this notion of clusters of no more than 300 really became a basis for planning and programming. And what you see on the screen is a notion of we have 7 clusters, medical being its own cluster, mental health, acute, subacute, its own cluster, reception, its own cluster, female, its own cluster, so that we're delivering services and managing, really unit management of a smaller group and a smaller group of staff, which will give us hopefully better span of control as we move ahead. Curtis, comments?
And much better outcomes, and by having like populations with similar management issues grouped together. In effect, it's sort of like a series of mini jails within a larger jail. So every cluster operates as its own sort of a unit in the larger scheme of the bigger facility. And this type of organizational of a jail has been proven very successful around the country.
And this will take development as we go through policy and procedure, but typically we would see a sergeant or a higher level person responsible for each cluster in terms of span of control over staff as well as the population. Correct, Curtis?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
So it's not only an architectural philosophy, it's also an operational philosophy.
Absolutely, absolutely.
What you see on the screen,
and this shows, yeah.
Go ahead, Curtis.
Yeah, this is, I mean, it's hard to read, but basically this is all the different population types that we will have in the jail. Every one of those bars is a different population type. So it shows the complexity of the inmate population. The needs are really complex. And the units vary in size. Some are single story, some are 2-story, some are 48, some are 60, some are 20, some are 32. So it's a very complex mixture, but we want to get it right so that the population that's in that particular housing cluster and housing unit are properly served with all the right services.
And this is probably something which is a very good comparison with the existing situation where in general, housing was approached as one size fits all. Whereas this looks at what are the specific needs for specific populations and classification. This is simply an illustration of our clusters, which became a basis for planning. And as Curtis pointed out, we have a whole range of housing types. 24-cell double-celled for general population, 32-cell single-celled for restricted and intake, 48-cell single-celled for maximum. And then we have mixed variations. And in some cases, we use single-level housing, i.e. medical and mental health. In other cases, we're using a 2-tier situation. This is a summary of the program. In a new facility, we'd be looking at about 768,000 square feet with a variety of uses. I would point out that as part of central booking, as Curtis said, you see the number for central intake is about 50,000 square feet. That does include reentry, that does include diversion, that does include adequate waiting space. It is not focused on locking people in cells at intake. It's really focused on open booking, access to services, access to pretrial release. The goal being really picking up on things Mr. Stanton was talking about earlier, to use this as a hub to assure that we only retain people in jail that actually need to be retained either for public safety or for flight, which is the primary purpose of a pretrial facility.
And we, for those of you that heard the presentation the other day in Harris County in Houston, you saw that, and exactly that's how they operate, and they've been very successful.
Yeah. So key elements in response to the pandemic, and this has been a good discussion we've initiated with the jail. One, a variety of housing units allow for separation. Significant increase in medical beds. Probably one of the most critical issues is this notion of service delivery at housing. so that if I have somebody in quarantine, I don't have to take them out of quarantine to go to recreation or deny them recreation. I don't have to take them out of quarantine to go to visiting or deny visiting. I can provide all my services right where I am, in fact, quarantining them. The enlarged.
Andy, one point before you launch into this, I want to make one, because this is an assumption. The one point that has to be made here is everyone's hopeful that there's a return to normalcy. But from a planning point of view, particularly with the jail, you can never assume that in the future that you will not either have a revisitation of this pandemic or another pandemic. We now know what happens. So we want to have a jail that is completely flexible to operate, efficiently in when we're the old norm, but we can't be in a position where we cannot also operate in a pandemic setting. So you have to design it to keep in mind that this is always going to be a potential in the future. It's irresponsible actually to assume that this will never happen again or it will not continue, because we all know that it can and it likely will again. So that's the presumption here, and I just wanted to say that.
And for example, I thought I had a question. I paused for a moment.
No, go ahead.
So, for example, even in our central intake, which we skipped over in the presentation, while best practice says this is planned for face-to-face meetings so that pretrial can talk to people, so the public defenders can talk to people, so the classification can talk to people, it's also set up for remote video, because that needs to be the fallback whenever we do go to more quarantine, not only of offenders, but quarantine of staff as well. So with that, I wanted to launch into the options that we were asked to look at. So option 2A, 3A, and 3C were all based on a new campus jail on a new site. 2A was to relocate the jail and rebuild the Justice Center. 3B was to relocate the jail and the courthouse to a new site. And 3C, which had 12 yeses and 0 nos, was the courthouse stays downtown, but we do move the jail to a site which will accommodate low-rise campus kind of development.
This is referring once again to the vote we took in January. And as you recall, there were these three were the preferred options, and then we decided to study a fourth option, as you recall. So that's what those numbers are. Go ahead, as a reminder.
So again, our general approach was to develop a housing unit which fits all the types we need, but yet is similar in plan, so that its staff can be moved from a 24-bed double cell unit to a 32-cell single cell unit to a 48-cell unit or a mixed unit, and it's the same kind of environment to work in. Co-locating reception and maximum security with intake, minimum security with work assignments, a separate cluster for females. One of the things we wanted to think about if we did a lower rise jail on a bigger site was, can we allow for incremental expansion? Rather than, for example, what happened with jail 2, we were significantly overcrowded and then had to do a major expansion. So we wanted to think about that as a basis for planning. Non-contact visiting access by attorneys and others at the housing cluster, separate parking, and a flexible approach to planning that could primarily be based on one level, if we can have a large enough site, or could be stacked just 2 over 2, but not high rise, of still a low rise building if we had other site limitations. So this is a basic idea of what we've used for housing. And this is a typical 24-cell, 48-bed housing unit. Cells along the outside, all cells with windows and a view of nature. Day room, which is easily visible to the officer. Outdoor exercise at every housing unit. So effectively, rather than people getting 1 hour a day, 3 days a week or 4 days a week, the housing officer unlocks the door. People can be outside when they want to be outside. That also reduces the apparent density and has been proven to reduce incidents in housing because there's more places for people to self-separate. Housing unit programs, multi-purpose, interview rooms, video visiting, everything that's needed to support it right on the housing unit. And then cluster unit support, which would be larger program rooms, non-contact visiting with attorneys, other kinds of activities that could serve a cluster of housing units. And this simply shows you that same plan being used for 3 different types of housing. At the upper left is what I just showed, would be 24 cells, 48 beds. This would be a 32 single cell footprint used for reception and restricted. This would be a 48 bed single cell footprint used for higher security inmates. Again, the thought being that if staff is moved from this unit to this unit to this unit, it's still the same kind of operating environment in terms of training, how things work, where things are, which is really intended to increase flexibility and operational flexibility, which not only aids in day-to-day operations, but whenever we are short-staffed for a variety of reasons, people call in sick, we can relocate staff and they're not learning something new in order to work in that unit. Every housing unit is based on direct supervision. That is, every housing unit has a staff member in there responsible for that population. They're responsible for delivering all services. The offender population knows they're responsible. The only door that's operated outside the unit is the door into the unit. We'll go back to master control to assure security of the unit. This is an overall diagram of that on the site. And what you see, I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, is you see a female cluster, which is potentially expandable, a male minimum cluster, expandable, single-celled special needs housing, medium security double-celled housing, reception and restricted housing, and maximum security housing. And then you see what is the large kind of support functions with central intake, courts, security operations, all located near reception and high security, food service, maintenance, warehouse, nor where minimum security is. And then you see this orange is really our circulation network. One of the facilities we were going to take you to see was Collin County. And one of the benefits of this is having the ability as you walk through the building to have access to outdoor space, natural light, as opposed to a building which is closed around itself. And again, this is just an organizational party to help set what if. Final design could be totally different based upon the program and the parameters we've outlined. And then this is the upper level, which is all of our medical, mental health, housing, and administration. And the yellow is actually a corridor system, which would allow attorneys and others to, outside security, to access non-contact visiting. Effectively, it's to always make sure that we're not only planning for video contact, but when we need to have an in-person visit, whether it's an attorney visit or a professional visit, we can do it without the cost, the safety concerns, the security concerns of moving the population to some central area. It should address the whole notion, as we've heard throughout this, about access to legal counsel for the population. So our basic capacity is about 1,648 beds. We have incremental capacity of about 200 beds, and then large capacity, which would get us to the 2,400 bed level, plus or minus. And again, that is something which will come back to the steering committee to confirm that determination of capacity. 1B, if we built downtown, and I know we're at 10 o'clock, so I'm going to go even more quickly, is to basically expand downtown. We were asked to look at this as a basis for comparison, both for the courts as well as the jail if we kept everything downtown. Unfortunately, or fortunately, with Sherwin-Williams' decision on the larger site, the only sites potentially available is across 3rd and 4th Street, because we will have to connect to jail 2. This assumes jail 1 goes away, but we cannot use the jail 1 site unless we found about 800 or 900 temporary beds to tear this down to rebuild. So the site would be potentially across the street. 2 ways to do that. One is to do a high rise on half the site. The other is to do a low rise on the full site. The high rise, we've talked about the inherent operational issues. It would significantly impact operational costs. Working with the jail staff, there's a preference towards horizontal organization. So as a basis for planning, we assumed horizontal organization. What that would mean is we'd have to either vertically expand or potentially in the future acquire additional property if needed to go to 2,400 beds. So the approach was basically the same. Develop a housing unit, except in this case, the housing unit must stack because we're going vertical. So we looked at first how we would reuse the existing jail. And in this case, we're assuming we're going to use it for minimum and medium general population and work with ODRC, since these are not restricted populations, to be able to, it assumes approval of increased capacity for double selling these populations as a way to drive down the cost of expansion. Right now, it is not approved officially for double selling. The new annex, we'd use a 48-bed single cell footprint, which is subdividable into 224s for double selling, or could be reconfigured to the 32-bed unit as well. And again, that would stack with 3 levels of support, primarily the first level being central intake and all those robust program and service functions that Curtis touched on in the program review, 2 levels for medical, 1 for housing, 1 for clinic, and then 3 levels of housing. The housing in the addition we would recommend would be high security, because of moving them directly from central booking and intake into high security housing. Reception housing, again, which wants to be near central booking. And the upper level is our female cluster to allow us to separate females from the general male population. An idea of the stacking diagram. Yeah, we basically have split the population, 800 beds in jail 2, 800 plus beds in the new annex. This would require 2 things which affect the costs. This site, as it assumed, would require deep pile foundations because we're near the lake. We know what the soils conditions are, which is an added cost. And we would have to either construct a tunnel or a bridge at the 4th level, similar to what we have now between jail 2 and jail 1, in order to connect the new annex to jail 2 and to the courts. So a quick review of comparative criteria. I don't know, Jeff, if we lost anybody yet?
They're just, I'll announce right now, the folks who have to go to the funeral are just leaving right now.
Yeah.
Okay. So, you know, obviously from a program.
Hold on, Andy.
Still listening. Can zoom in and and I'll follow up with it on audio.
Yeah, and we will, with you and your judges, whoever you want, we'll go back. Everything you haven't seen, we will specially do with you and have that special meeting. Thank you for your participation. Go ahead, Andy.
All right. Curtis, do you want to talk about the subjective criteria from a program perspective?
Yeah, sure. I mean, a couple of things that are really important. Again, you know, the ability to have responsivity, so staff, you know, and services can be as close to the inmate population as possible. Jail 2, you know, despite whatever renovation work will happen, that can't really do what we can achieve in a new facility. So that's a negative, which is why it's orange versus green. And the operational efficiency, you know, is again, we're not going to be able to achieve the same staff efficiency because we're still moving a lot of people back and forth between 2 buildings. And again, that adds, you know, that adds staffing costs for services. And the flexibility of the footprint is, again, it's very difficult to do any expansion in a downtown environment. So, you know, those are sort of the major negatives on the operational side.
You know, from a locational perspective, obviously being downtown is a great location. It always has been. There's always the issue of parking. There is the issue of economic impact of taking a half a block of prime real estate downtown and developing it as the jail. For the new facility, everything's green except for 2 things: attorney access. We know that that's something that we have to have consideration for determining where we would site it. And we also know that there was up above that there was concerns about court transport in terms of programmatic suitability. We are aware of that. Our understanding and discussions with the county is that court transport is going to be transferred directly to the jail with its own transportation unit. Uh, it's done very successfully across the country. We may at some point, Curtis, want to organize some virtual tours with people that are doing it, like Philadelphia and Maricopa County, and Broward, I believe, also is doing it, and Colin. Colin made the decision, the similar decision. Developmental impacts, again, we believe that the site availability downtown perhaps should be read, because we only have one site to deal with in terms of what could be made to work if we want to interconnect the facilities. We assume construction logistics are more difficult because we're downtown. We assume, and that's one of the other issues for discussion today, that our site criteria would look for the ideal site, locationally, programmatically, and cost and construction wise. Hence, for now, we believe that we can control that to a certain extent. So it's therefore ranked as highly responsive. Jeff, should we continue in the cost, or
I think I want to continue and go to cost, and then we will have questions, because cost is a critical area here of consideration.
All right. For costs, we actually use 3 independent estimators, and we had them look at this from a program perspective on a component basis.
By the way, we're going to take a break. I want everyone to know we're going to take, actually, you know what? Given what I see, let's take a 5-minute break now. So we'll keep it on. I'm just going to give some folks 5 minutes for a bio break. And then let's make it 10 minutes. So it's a real bio break, and then we'll get right back into this. Okay, so 10 minutes. We'll get back.
Thank you, Jeff.
Because I was thinking maybe the speaker needs one. So 10:25, 10:25 Eastern, we'll launch back in. I'm going to just leave everything open right now. So 10 minutes. Andy, are you there? Andy, go off of, oh, I see. Andy? Can you put the screen back up that has the instructions for polling for a second? The earlier on screen, then you can come back to this screen, which is 74. Just earlier in your presentation. Andy, are you hearing me? No, I don't know if mine's coming through now. Andy, can you hear me?
Yes, Jeff, I can hear you now.
Sorry, okay. Would you go just for a second and go, you're on screen 74, just go earlier on to the first screen that we had on polling, because people can, while they're coming back for the next 3 minutes, people can log back in. I want those instructions back up again, please.
You got it.
Thank you. Very first slide. Okay, so while we're waiting, we'll give people another 3 minutes. If you want to go back to your smartphones, and if you want to put this information in your smartphone, what it means is that, and then you will see, just put in the session, you go to ttpoll.com, enter the session ID number, and then if you hit join, it'll say polling closed. But what that also means is that you will be, as soon as we get to the polling part of the presentation, we will be ready to go. So if you want to take a minute and do that, and then we're going to start in 1 minute. Okay.
Jeff, since we're past our 10 o'clock deadline, do you want to pause and see if there's any questions on the options before we go into the more detail on the comparison?
I think, actually, what I think we'd like to do, I think you should continue on with the detail first, because I think it's going to generate more questions, and it's also going to provide some of the answers to what some of the questions might be. And I do want to make sure we get through the content. We'll have plenty of time for questions. I would also advise, recommend that people, if you have a question, certainly you can also use the chat function and post your question on the chat function. I'm not, we're all learning together on Zoom. I'm not positive that when I ask people to unmute and make sure they have the ability to do it, I'm not sure that it doesn't sometimes revert back. So if anyone's if any steering committee member wants to ask a question and has difficulty with the mute, the function, once again, please either just send a chat message to me and I'll make sure you're unmuted. Okay, at this point in time, Andy, I'll say it one more time. If you haven't yet done this, take a second, because now you can get into the program. It will say polling closed, but you'll be ready when we poll. So use your smartphone, go to ttpoll.com. The session is TH, and that's the date. We're all seeing that, Andy.
I know. This will make it easier to point, Jeff. I'm just making a quick change.
That's fine.
Yeah.
So that's,
All right.
yeah, 10/01/2020, the date. Just enter your name, hit join. It'll say polling closed. You'll be all set to go. So with that in mind, Andy, let's go ahead and return to, I think it was your slide 74. And we can keep going with the analysis.
Right. So this is an overview of how we think they stack up programmatically. I would also point out something on this, which we did not put on the chart, but in response to Mr. Stanton's question, it's also a lot easier to downsize if we're planning on a new low-rise facility, to simply eliminate a pod or two than it would be on any high-rise facility or vertical facility downtown. So I think that's another advantage of options 2A, 3B, and 3C. Also, Judge Russo sent me a note during the break that I had mislabeled the other slides. It is option 3B that the steering committee had selected, not 3A. It said 3A in all the headers, but I did correct that. So just for a moment to talk a bit about the harder objective criteria. From a cost estimating perspective, we use multiple independent estimators to look at the program. And what you see on the right, which is not necessary to read, but basically we use this on a component basis. So each estimator looked at what's the differential to construct maximum security housing versus minimum, to construct single cells versus dormitories, to construct housing versus healthcare. So it was a component-based estimate. We then reconciled those because each estimator looked at things a little bit differently, and that gave us a really good blend of what we think the costs would be. We also made sure they were adjusted to the Cuyahoga County Cleveland market, and we compared them to a couple recent projects. And we did take into account differential. Some of those projects were highly compact buildings with a high percentage of dormitory housing rather than single or double cell housing. So we took all that into account in developing what we thought that the basis for costing should be. So these two tables.
I want to caution people, because this is the part that I always get nervous about. This is an art, not a science. And, you know, this can vary depending on what we do programmatically. It also can vary just on market conditions. We're seeing some wild things going on with markets right now in construction. But I will tell you that there are 3 different firms that have looked at this independently. I will tell you that we've been able to consider the construction costs of 2 current projects right now, one in Indianapolis, one in Detroit, that are building jails and complexes. So we know Midwest pricing. We have been able to convert to Cleveland. So these are indications. These are not final in any sense, but these are for an indication of what a cost range likely would be with all available information and all the programming that we know about for the project. So I want to make that clear.
Okay. So with that, I want to give you an understanding of how the costs stack up. A new jail on a new site, and this is at the 1,600 bed level with a core for 2,400, would have a construction cost of just under $400 million, $398 million. Our project costs then would include fees and administration at 15%. We have not plugged in a number for site acquisition yet because we have not went there, but whenever we compare it, we do believe that the cost of a site for a new jail, new site outside of the central business district would be substantially less than really being captive to the site we would have to buy adjacent to Justice Center. We allowed for furniture, fixtures, and equipment. We allowed for contingencies for new construction, which takes us to a project cost of $491 million. And again, these are based upon the project moving ahead in today's dollars, not escalated out to 3 to 4 to 5 years in the future for moving ahead, because we do not know what the implementation schedule would be. Now, if we compare that, and this would be for the three primary options selected, all of which were a new jail, a new low-rise jail, and a new site. If we compare that to a new annex and renovation, obviously our new construction cost is lower because we're building less new, even though our unit costs would be higher for a downtown site because it's of a high-rise, it being a vertical building. Limited site development costs because we're basically building over the entire site. One of the things we have to allow for, though, is deep POW foundations. We know with where this site would sit that anything we would do would take a substantial investment underground just to support the building due to the soils conditions. An allowance for a tunnel or bridge connector. No determination whether it's a tunnel or a bridge at this point because that may involve negotiations with the city as well. Renovation of the existing building.
One thing I'm going to point out, if you've had a lot of experience with tunnels in Cleveland, Ohio, that number will be higher for a downtown tunnel. And I think maybe not 12, but it'll be close. It'll be between 5 and 10. Let's just say it that way.
Okay.
Right, go ahead.
Renovation costs, which is both shell and core, as well as some fit out changes inside, especially fit out changes to eliminate all the housing control rooms, which have a significant operational cost. And we can change that to move all electronic controls to master control and then go to direct supervision in the units. It also would be upgrades that Curtis and I have discussed of how we use a 2-tier unit for special needs by enclosing the upper tier with glazing, et cetera. The shell and core upgrades, which were budgeted from the study. And we also have to remember that Jail 2 cannot be done until after the annex is completed. The thought of an implementation plan would be build the annex, vacate Jail 2. We either vacate Jail 2 by just vacating Jail 2 into the annex or by shifting folks into Jail 1. That would allow us to renovate Jail 2 in a single phase, which would significantly reduce costs because it would be vacant for renovation. Again, no site development costs. Fees are based on the same 15%. FF&E is the same percent. Contingencies were changed. New construction is pretty easy to get a handle on the basis of what we're building. Renovations, there's always unknowns, so we used a higher contingency. So our total probable cost to do option 1B, to meet the program for the new jail adjacent the existing Justice Center, would be in the neighborhood of $564 million. So we're looking at about a $70 million swing between new versus reuse if we have to shell beds for the future, rather than consider building a high-rise building or consider future land acquisition. We would have another premium of $70 million, which would bring the cost of that to just over $634 million in today's dollars. Now, from an operational cost, we basically we know we are going to save housing positions because we are going to go from operating 66 direct supervision housing units to 41 direct supervision housing units. We will, in the new facility, do away with control rooms. Right now, there's control rooms on every floor of Jail 2 that are staffed, and there's control rooms on the floors of Jail 1. In a new facility, all the main controls would simply go back to master control, and the staff person inside the unit would be responsible for unit controls. So there's significant staffing savings here in the range of 195 correctional FTEs. Remember, that's because each one of these positions, each position requires 5 people. So when you save a position, you're effectively saving 5 correctional FTEs. There's additional savings from what Curtis has talked about service delivery at the housing unit. We no longer are having a lot of escort staff to get people to visiting, to get people to medical, to get people to attorney visits, to get people to recreation. We're providing increased program and service access at a reduced cost. There would be a cost for court transport, and we outlined that in our presentation in January. And again, these are over the road, 10-year, 15-year buses with staff that would be responsible for movement and for manning a large central holding area at the courthouse. For reuse, our savings go down because again, if we reuse jail 2, we're actually going to end up with 51 housing pods instead of 41 housing pods. Each housing pod requires an additional 5.1 correctional FTEs. There would still be duplication in control rooms because of the 2 buildings being separate. We can't get away from that. So our savings will get down significantly to about $7 million a year. And we anticipate there'd be additional costs because of still operating 2 buildings that we really don't have a handle on at this point in time. So how does that compare? Our raw construction cost is $457 million downtown versus $398 million offsite, which is very, very comparable to the projects we've checked in the Midwest as gauges. Our project costs are higher downtown also, which again gets us to that differential of about $70 million between a new jail and a downtown jail. And again, if you go back to the other choice, you're paying more for less in terms of what we get in the end, in terms of the quality of program responsiveness and everything else. There's potentially a penalty for future expansion, which would either be shell space or potentially buying additional land. Whereas the new jail on the new site, we would be building that into the basic decision. Critical issue is how long is it going to take? New jail on a new site is basically a 3-year process, design and construction. New construction plus renovation is at least 6 years because it's 2 major phases to undertake.
I want to caution, just hold on, because once again, I want to caution that the 3-year process is a 3-year process from a go on all accounts. You have to, it's a go to begin design. It's a go to be working on site acquisition. It's a go to have everybody working on, the financing plan, and it's a go to any intra or inter-community agreement or inter-agreement between the county, let's say, and the city. So I don't want there to be a false impression. You can do it in that period of time, but there's a series of line items that all have to be accomplished, and any one of those could become a critical path delay if it doesn't get done. So it's possible, but it's not like you can say tomorrow, let's go, and it can be delivered. All these things, there's at least 4 different line items that all have to happen concurrently. So it's possible to do it in that time frame. Just, I don't want the newspaper report saying we can, that these things can't automatically happen. All that has to happen to make that work.
Yeah, again, our time to occupancy is based from start date to finish date after decisions are made to move ahead. Annual operating costs, we'd save about $7.89 million. Downtown, we'd save over 14 million in a new jail. Some of that 7.89 would be eroded because of rovers and movement staff between the 2 facilities, which we have not quantified. There would be no court costs. There would be further erosion by duplication. So our net operational cost savings would be less than $7.89 million. On the other side, our base savings is about 14.7. Again, we believe there's some additional savings we haven't quantified yet because of the staff that's used in the existing jail. There is additional court transport costs that would have to be figured into that cost. There is no duplication, so our savings, we believe, would be greater than $13.91 million.
Once again, just to be clear, everything above the line in the first category is a one-time savings. Everything in the lower half of this is our annual savings at the time.
No, correct.
Correct. And when we ran this calculation out over 30 years, basically you have to take this savings and escalate that at normal escalation rates. So each year the savings is greater than it is in today's dollars.
There's 2 points to be made about savings. What you would do if you were going to do a financial analysis, you would take the savings out to whatever you want, like 20 years, because you have to do a present value analysis of that versus the cost. But keep in mind, at the end of the day, even though you take it out that long for purposes of a financial analysis, the savings will continue for as long as the facility is in operation. So those savings go on until such time as you have a new facility. So it's multiple of even 20-year look.
And because we had presented this before, we updated it. What would the total money be available for debt service? And that would include the other savings the county has already realized, which may or may not be available for debt service, but we did put it in the table. From the closure of Euclid, Bedford, out-county placement. At one point in time, the county was spending $12.33 million for that. So if you look at these two options in total, for option 1B, we'd have something less than $20 million in total savings. For options 2A, 3B, or 3C, we would have something greater than 26 million if we take into account everything that was part of the budget at the time we started the planning process.
Keep in mind that on two of these ideas, the TBD for the rover movement, we know that will not, you will not get great savings in column 1, but we think there'll be substantial savings in column 2.
That is correct. So Jeff, that is the overview of the jail options, from continued use of what we have or a split jail facility, the steering committee's preference for options 2A, 3B, and 3C to relocate the jail to a new site, which we believe is also very consistent with jail staff, jail administration, Rhonda, the deputy wardens, and the sheriff's perception of what the best operating jail could be for Cuyahoga County, versus what we were also asked to look for, which was, what if we just do something downtown adjacent to jail 2?
Okay, let me just ask, we could do a couple things. Is in your, because we now have to backtrack a little bit before I talk about questions, do you want to go to jail or to population management next, Andy? Or do you want to go through the review? Because I mean, population management is one of we have 3 topics we have to talk about. Population management, we have to talk about, we do have to do the update on diversion. We do have to do the update on central booking, which will be brief. We do want to get into the polling, and we also want to do the discussion.
Well, there is one other topic, Jeff, which is to review the potential site criteria for 2A, 3B, and 3C.
Of course, I completely, having worked on it, I forgot. So where do you want to go next? Because I think what we ought to do is we ought to at least do population management as it relates to these decisions, and then ask for comment and discussion. So I would go to population management first. Pardon? Yeah, Andy, why don't you and tell us what page for those who are
Well, Jeff, what I would suggest is let's go back and do the quick update on the diversion as well, because understanding diversion impacts population management.
Okay, that's fine. You can do
We'll
either.
just, we'll just go back to the beginning of the agenda,
Okay,
which would be starting on page 6 of the presentation.
okay. I'm just going to be, I want you to be mindful though, that on some of this, we need to move quickly. We have a lot to do and talk about, and I also want people to continue to stay excited and involved.
Okay.
All
So
right.
Curtis, let's do a
We'll
brief
be
update.
fast. Okay. So
Curtis and Cheryl, and then Judy if she's on.
yeah, if you could unmute Cheryl and Judy also, Jeff.
Oh, yeah, okay. Cheryl, you should be in position, and let me find, I only have to look through 80 names to find names.
Right. Well, let me start.
Yeah, let's start.
So we finished the study for diversion after, with the last steering committee, we gave you the glance viewpoint, but the report was published in February. Again, we focus on, again, this is pre-arrest. We focused on 3 populations: seriously mentally ill, SMIs, which are seriously mentally ill with substance abuse issues, as well as just the pure substance abuse addicted population. So we had ranges of potential clients: 49 to 53 for the SMIs, 45 to 48 for the SMI with SA issues, and 61 to 65 on the SA addiction issues. And again, if our report's out there, if you want to read the details of it, but that's where we came up with approximately 150, 160 potential clients. So the continuum of diversion is really critical and involves a lot of things. Crisis intervention training for all law enforcement agencies in the county. Right now, 25% of Cleveland police forces are volunteering for that, but that's not sufficient. We need to have everybody involved in this. A 24-hour call and help desk for law enforcement, proactive community crisis management, stabilization, treatment teams, an assessment center and essential receiving point for law enforcement to drop people off. And then as far as the treatment itself, both short and long-term stabilization, inpatient, it's a combination of inpatient, residential, and outpatient, medical detoxification, sobering centers, MAT treatment and medical assistant treatment, and also wraparound services. So that's the core recommendations that we came up with. Next slide. Andy.
This is a solicitation framework.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, that one. Yeah. So we had several solicitations. We'll go through that in a minute. But basically, the key components of what we were requesting from providers was a focus on pre-arrest and people in crisis, the CIT training, which I said a second ago, for all county and law enforcement, a 24-hour call-in helpline, and the creation of an assessment diversion center, which we're calling the CCADC. And that target population was up to 50 beds for seriously mentally ill, up to 50 beds for SMI, substance abuse population, and up to 50 beds for substance abuse and addicted population, with all capacities have the ability to expand if we're really successful, which we really hope we are. As far as the CCADC diversion program itself, we asked for a description of the treatment, how they plan to do it, and very programmatic and specific facilities description. Where will this occur? Where will the CCADC actually occur? We also asked for a detailed explanation. How would you measure success, outcome goals, which has to be supported by a robust data collection and performance measures. We wanted to know the credentials of the providers and their staff, the operating costs, detailed operating costs, funding sources from outside funding, for example, Medicare and Medicaid, and then how would you collaborate with other agencies. So the next slide, I'll just turn to Cheryl. In terms of actually what happened here. So.
Yeah. So the goals, as stated before, when we did the solicitation, we were looking to establish a 24-hour call-in helpline for law enforcement. We were looking for CIT training to be available to all law enforcement officers within the county, and then the establishment of the assessment and diversion center to better understand what types of services are presently out there and how organizations might come together to meet these goals. We issued a request for information in February with a deadline of March. We had 9 agencies respond to that. And based upon the type of information that was provided, we proceeded to develop a request for actual proposals to address the 3 goals. That was issued in May, and with the submission deadline of June. We had 3 respondents. One was submitted by the Adams Board of Cuyahoga County, also called the Unified Response, where, let me see, 6 agencies had, other agencies besides Adams Board had gone in on a collaborative response. Cleveland Treatment Center and then Rockefeller Point. We interviewed 2 of them, Cleveland Treatment Center and the Adams Board group. The Rockefeller Point was not interviewed because they were non-responsive to the RFP. It was simply that they were looking to provide a facility for the diversion center. The Adams Board was top ranked, yet subsequently withdrew because St. Vincent's Charity Medical Center withdrew from the partnership. And they were the main source for the diversion center. So we reissued the RFP the 1st of September. We are now, and we received responses from the Adams Board, who has collaborated with Frontline Services, Oriana House, and Lifelong Transportation. The second one was Metro Health System, who has collaborated with Recovery Resources, and then Rockefeller Point. We interviewed Adams Board and Metro Health. Again, Rockefeller Point was looking to enter into a long-term facility arrangement, yet did not look to provide any of the requested services. So we're still in the process of evaluating those responses. We have interviewed both groups, and we are now at the point that we're seeking additional information.
And we did want to share.
Thank you, Cheryl, for that summary.
And we did want to share with you, if you recall, we had planned to take tours of similar facilities to provide information to the county and stakeholders and steering committee on how this could be implemented. The Bear County Restoration Center was kind enough to give us a virtual tour, which we had very good participation on. And we just wanted to touch on how successful that's been. First of all, one of the things that was key, very similar to our project, that had leadership at the highest level. It was something the county wanted to do. They started in 2003, so they have an 18-year history. And similar to some of the questions even raised earlier, the primary impetus was the county judge, which is equivalent to the county executive in Cuyahoga County, did not want to build an additional 1,000 jail beds. He wanted to know what could be done differently in terms of the population. And I think the proof is that San Antonio, which is Bear County, has continued to grow. Their jail is the same size today it was when they started this program in 2003, because they've been able to successfully divert. Curtis?
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, well, I guess
Curtis, 2 things.
sorry.
Do we have, for anyone who wants to see it, a recording of that session? I thought.
Yes, we do. It was that. Yes, we do.
So, because I'm a little concerned about how fast we go through this. It was a great tour, and you can hit just a couple of the high points. But I also want to tell you, if you're really interested in this, you should look at the recording of the tour that we took, because it was really quite good. But go ahead quickly.
Yeah. So I think we have a list of recordings at the end of this. I think with the slides coming up. And if we don't have the one, the actual recording, we'll make it available, Jeff, to anybody who wants a copy of it. So essentially, Bear County is probably the gold standard because they've been doing it for a long time. They've been very successful. Again, some of the keys to success there is strong leadership by the county leadership. The county judge is like the county executive, and great cooperation of behavioral health, mental health, hospitals, law enforcement. Was really a team effort there. And it has really been proven to be, again, the model where most, counties around the country have followed their particular model.
Yeah. And again, I think a critical part of this was true community-wide support, as Curtis pointed out. It's also a separate nonprofit, which allows it to tap Medicaid and other funding programs. It has linkages to longer term treatment. Again, this is very similar to what the steering committee and stakeholders and the county have been talking about for Cuyahoga County. It's a front end diversion center that can then link people to longer term treatment. And this is a list of the videos which will be posted on the website as part of this presentation. And we will add to this a link to the video of our internal discussion, Jeff.
I think that's important because there were specific questions asked about how this would have applicability to Cuyahoga County. So I think actually looking at that video is critical. So go ahead.
Yeah. Just a quick update on interim central booking. We did complete the preliminary scoping documents. They were submitted to the state in June. We received approval of the project based on planning and design in August. And we did have a series of working groups with everybody that's affected. And there's still a lot of things to be worked out operationally as this moves ahead with construction. The county has executed the initial design build contract with Ozan Construction and Bowen Architects. They started in June. They made the phase 2 submittal to ODRC. They moved ahead with the permit set. They're in the process of relocating Sheriff's Administration off of the 3rd floor. Design builder subcontractor plan's been initiated. The county's anticipating getting the GMP November 10th, with construction start in September to October on the relocation and demolition, with an anticipated completion date in April 2020. And there will be a lot of corollary actions because now there's going to be space right in central booking for city pretrial. There's going to be space right in central booking for common pleas pretrial services once we get once that program gets up and operating. There is space in pretrial service in central booking for both private attorneys and public defenders to meet with clients. It's also set up so that it's not a sequential process. One of the worst things that happens in booking is it's go from A to B to C to D, and when there's a backup at B, C, D, and E aren't getting done. This is going to be set up so that while somebody's being fingerprinted, somebody else can be meeting with pretrial services. The goal being to be able to do activities concurrently to move people through, to allow for discussions between defense counsel and the prosecuting attorney, to allow for discussions between the prosecuting attorney and law enforcement on the basis for charges, to make better decisions to help divert a larger portion of the population. Without getting into a lot of detail, we also did a virtual tour of Harris County, which has a very, very robust central booking center. Curtis, you want to just touch on this briefly?
So yeah, Harris County opened up last February, a little bit, about a year and a half. It's probably one of the largest processing centers in the U.S. at this point. They process through about 105,000 individuals in a year, but everything was consolidated in one location. Again, it's a bigger version of what we're hoping to do with interim booking. Again, the DA, the public defender, the pretrial services, robust pretrial services, mental health, a 24/7 appearance court, both for municipal and county court, are right there. And so when they first come in the door, there's a diversion opportunity. If they haven't been diverted, and they have diversion facilities there as well, like in San Antonio, they have a sobering center, they have a mental health diversion. There's 4 or 5 diversion opportunities right pre-arrest before they even get to this facility. But if they can't be released, they have another opportunity when they come here. And they go through the court process. If they cannot be released, they go in custody. If they can be released, and anybody released through the system, that also passes through a reentry services area. So when they leave the facility, they make sure they have a bus pass, they can get to mass transit, that they have the medication, that they're connected with social and mental health services in the community. So it's really wraparound services all in one facility.
And 3 things we'd point out that I think came out of our discussion at TOR. One, by court order, everybody is represented by the public defender at first appearance. so that arrestees are getting counsel relative to release options. Secondly, there's computerized scheduling that eliminates queuing. It basically comes up if somebody's in an activity, i.e. they're meeting with pretrial, their name comes up in red, they're not available for other activities. And the last bullet is something when we get to population management we've been talking about for some time. They do have what they call a jail expediter who every day looks at the data available, looks at who's in jail, looks at who might be eligible for bail review, looks at who's potentially eligible for diversion or a mental health court or some other or a veterans court as a way to move them through the system faster. That's been very successful from what we heard at the virtual tour. And the other thing which we talked about is the critical factor is that their data system can interface with everybody in the county so that information's only entered once and they can get good reports on who's in jail for what bail amount for how long. And do they have other holds on them?
Yeah, this facility paralleled with the planning and design and construction was the development of this robust database system and IT system. And it could not function if it did not have this in place.
And again, this is what we're looking at in terms of what a central booking would be. It's really designed to move people through quicker, to allow for better decisions on release, diversion, and moving people through. And in fact, we're going back to the diversion thing that Curtis and Cheryl just talked about, there's also a diversion desk in intake so that if the decision's not made on the street, it can be made at central booking with the agreement of the parties. And the outcomes have been tremendous from their discussion. Officers returned to the street in under 30 minutes, reduced incidents and injuries to both offenders and staff, and a reduction in total bed capacity needs.
Let me stop you right there. We are going to have to move on. A couple questions though, and I don't know if this is the right time to address the question. But one question is, what preparations are being made to ensure victims' rights are being protected during the pre-indictment, pre-charge diversion topic? Have we begun to assess our requirements here under Marzy's law? I don't know whether I don't know who's been involved in that specific conversation, if that's something Andy, you or Cheryl or Curtis want to respond to.
I'm not exactly sure what the question is about pre-indictment, pre-charge on diversion. Diversion is actually pre-arrest. So there is no charge actually at all. So I think that answers that question.
Yes.
I also think, Jeff, that this is one of the things which we have said has to be done in parallel, which now that we've been able to move the construction ahead, the interim central booking allows the county, the stakeholders, all to assess what their operational policy and procedure will be to test it before we move into a more robust central booking center in a new facility. We've continually raised the question about, will the public defender, similar as he does in 3C, now represent everybody until their case is actually assigned to a judge? You know, those issues are still issues that are pending that require cross-stakeholder work to really determine the day-to-day workings of this.
Okay. And by the way, there's a few of you who have also asked, some of you are jumping in and out of the meeting, and you have logged in and you see the screen that says polling closed, and you've asked, what do I do now? The answer is nothing. You're set to go, and when we start the polling exercise, your iPhone will respond. So you're just exactly where you need to be. Just hold on for that for a little while yet. Go ahead, Andy.
I would stress that I think the county has been shown absolute foresight in moving ahead with interim central booking as a way to help reduce the jail population. And quite frankly, in response to Ms. Jordan's question, to actually assure that people have better representation and there is more discussion about release opportunities. And this is absolutely critical as across the country, everybody looks at bail reform.
And philosophically,
But we really do need a champion at the county level, maybe Mr. Corey if he's on the phone, to take the lead in helping to work with the jail, with stakeholders in operational policy and procedure of how this is actually going to work, Jeff.
Yeah, and the two points that I just want to underscore that we'll go on is, number one, this is viewed, this is not only a short-term solution to problems, and Mr. Mason constantly has told me about how it had to be implemented yesterday, and we are doing our best to get it implemented. So it's not only short-term and what we do right now, but this actually creates the behavioral change. As we go forward to the new facility, it is the behavioral change and people using a central booking concept that then gets built into the future facility, because it's designed around that concept, which is very, very critical here.
Yep. Okay, do we want to move to population management, Jeff?
Yes, please.
Last week, what we did try to convene a population management workshop, and unfortunately, due to the pressures of getting the trial court up and operating, and everything that's been going on with moving into the global center and actually starting jury trials, common pleas, the prosecutor and others were unable to participate, which is totally understood in the situation we're in. The city, however, did participate, as well as some other stakeholders. And our intent was to, picking up on what Mr. Stanton asked earlier, was to understand what's been done and what is sustainable. And again, as we were talking, this is what's been done. The population actually dropped by some 96%, almost by 50% from October to May, by actions taken. And what we want to do, and we will need to continue this discussion now with common pleas, which most of our representatives.
Andy, hold on, go back to the last slide. Just to be clear with everyone. It went down in May to 1,000, it was actually 1,014, 1,049. It then returned up into the, I think the highest it got back to was 1,500 plus, and it's now somewhere where around 1,450, something like that, I think is the number. Just for everyone's benefit, that's where we are. That's what's going on right now. So go ahead.
Yeah. So this is what we were able to come out of that meeting, and we did have people discuss what common pleas are done, even though common pleas and the prosecutor were unable to attend. The city ramped up increased use of GPS, bond schedule, non-assault of offenses released immediately. And our thought was, and the city's thought was, that yes, that's sustainable. And you see on the next line, the discussion we had earlier, that the city's use of county jail space has dropped drastically from an ADP of over 200 to an ADP of around 52. And while city arrests are down, there's not a sense that there's going to be a drastic increase in jail use. So I think that's a very positive in terms of the future.
I believe that the comment was they thought this would stabilize in the 75 to 100 range. Is that, do I recall that correctly?
I think it was 75 to 80. Marty, is Marty still on?
Yeah, but I have him on. I have to find him to unmute him. I'll find it. Marty, stand by. We're going to ask you to comment on that.
Yeah, Jeff, it was said that it expects to stabilize at around up to 80, about 80 a day.
Okay. Go ahead.
All right. One of the other issues that's been driving the population is misdemeanors are not confined in detention. It's been cite and release. And there was a general sense that that may not be sustainable for the future. The suspension of grand juries and indictments. And again, that's not believed to be sustainable for the future, that there will be more indictments. Limited prosecutions of F5s, especially for drug cases. I think Ms. Jordan brought this up during the meeting, which has created a huge current backlog. And again, that's not believed that that's going to be sustainable. But under both that and refrain from sentencing, there was a discussion about what are the other options that could be looked at, from charge reduction from an F5 to a misdemeanor, and what are other sentencing options that could exist longer term as part of a population management strategy. Probation violators are not being pulled in for technical violations. We pointed out, though, in that discussion that Karen's analysis of this found that, you know, probation violators were still spending 4 to 5 to 7 days in jail before they were getting a hearing. So the question was, we probably will not continue to suspend probation violations, but are there A, other options for probation violations, and B, is there a way to reduce jail days from the time that somebody's picked up on a violation and they appear and perhaps get released? You know, quite frankly, probation violations and parole violations in our country are a major issue driving populations across the country that have impacts on people that do have jobs, people that do have a place to live, and on their families. So it is something that's beyond jail days, which we believe is important to look at. Curtis, any comments so far?
No, I think you're doing a good job, Andy. I mean, I think this is exactly what we discussed. It was a very, very good discussion with the city. We just need to engage some of the county justice leaders, you know, see what their opinions are.
Continuing.
Hold on 1 second. Yeah, I was actually going to ask, and maybe you want to take a second, but we do have the prosecutor's office here, and we do have Murray here in the room. And if this is the right time, Mike, did you want to comment on any of this?
A grand jury continually in session over the course of the pandemic, though our indictments were just specifically the violence. And so those individuals were indicted, processed, and most of them are probably still being incarcerated in county jail waiting trial. So we did maintain some level of grand jury indictments. We are backed up, I think, roughly to 2,000 indictments currently. Most of those are for lower level cases, and it would be my hope that once they are indicted and arraigned, that they will maintain their freedom pending trial. Additionally, I was just wondering, given, you know, I think everybody on the committee, as well as probably all of our consultants, were surprised at how quickly the jail population was cut in half.
Surprised and delighted,
yeah,
by the way.
Mr. Mason, Mr. Corey, who've all been part of this discussion for a long time. I don't think any of us ever anticipated that, in fact, we could cut the jail population, as Mr. Stanton indicated, some days down in the 900s. And I was just wondering, given the fact, and I really do believe that we will get back down to that number when we, in fact, have everybody operating at full speed again. Because right now, I think the true number is roughly in the 1200s, given the fact that we have so many people awaiting transport to.
Yeah, you might want to explain the delay. I think that's a good point. So right now, there's an issue with respect to the delay to transport. And why don't you explain that to everybody?
Let me just explain, yeah, I don't know if people, that's the problem we face right now with the county jail is the protocol that the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Corrections has placed upon our county jail, that individuals sentenced to prison must continue to sit in our facility, be tested, isolated for several weeks.
14 days, is it? Or is it a 14-day?
14 days. So they have to be tested before they go in isolation. They have to be tested when they're about to get out of isolation. We have to get those test results back before they can be transported to ODRC. So that, in effect, is taking literally weeks and weeks of isolation time. And unfortunately, if somebody is accidentally placed in that pod, and all those people get kicked back. And if somebody tests positive in that isolation group, they all get kicked back, and the clock has to restart on all of them. So it is a very, very difficult situation as far as getting prisoners out of county to ODRC. Additionally, we have literally another 60, 80 cases awaiting transport to halfway houses and local incarceration. So currently, we probably have close to 200 people awaiting transport to a variety of halfway houses, local correctional facilities, or the state penal system. So, I think the true number right now is probably 400, but again, we have not had trials for weeks and weeks and weeks, actually months and months and months. So we're starting to gear up, and I anticipate the number will begin to decline again as we move forward processing cases. But the question I was going to ask is that I am very confident, much like Mr. Stanton, that we will get into the 900s again. And then if we have a diversion center constructed that may reduce our population an additional 150, would the consultants feel that if we are hovering between, say, 750 and 850 people in population, does it require us to take a look at our options again? And if that's going to be the consistent population in Cuyahoga County, does that change things as to how you feel what our best options may be moving forward?
Well, I'm gonna make a comment, and I'm gonna obviously turn it over to our consultants. Letting them buy time to think about this. But I've asked this question, as you can imagine, repeatedly, let's get to the real basic question. The real basic question is, we knew that we had problems with the jails before. A lot of that had to do with overcrowding. And so there's two fundamental issues with the jails. One is simply the physical condition that we have to address anyway. So the second question is, and assuming that, we figure out the dollars that you have to do that. Now the question is, if you really had a population in the 900s, and of course you still have to, at least have 85% more than that. So let's say it's planned for 1,000 to, I don't know what the number would be, 1,000, 1,100 is, is the equivalent of the 1,600. Now the question is, now you compare two things. Does it make sense? Can you do it in the current jail? And by the way, jail 2, it still is not large enough. So you got to think about what else you'd have to do with that. And then the question is, can you then, versus, by the way, you can also talk about a much more efficient campus. So now instead of building to 1,600, you still have the core, but maybe it's not 16 to 24. Maybe you do it to 12, let's say 11 or 1,200, expandable to 1,600, and then you bring that construction cost down and transportation costs down. So it's both of these things vary. So I'll say two things. First, even if we made a decision to go forward, we still would be constantly looking at the numbers, because in the programming and the design process that comes next, you're still going to have 6 or 8 months to adjust. But having said that, my understanding, talking to our consultants, is it wouldn't change the conclusion, but I'm going to let them now address that, because what you've asked, let's face it, that's the question you just asked is the question that's been going through everybody's mind for the last 4 months.
Yeah, and again, my question is, because I think that it was viable to take down jail 1 and transfer people to jail 2 and then reconstruct something more efficient at jail 1. I just didn't think that was possible, because I think the numbers were going to hover at 1,500. Given what's happened over the last 6 months, I no longer think that. So it's cool to sit back and think, what will the number be? What can we do when we come back and are fully in operation? What number can we lower it back to, and what makes the most sense given what's we've now learned?
Yeah, and I'm just going to say, for everyone's benefit, the question that you have just asked, I mean, it is the question. That is the most fundamental question that has to be properly answered right now. And we have been, now I think there's some who would, and of course we want to drive that population down. Question is, what can you depend on? But let me stop talking and let me ask Andy and Curtis, you have the question, right?
Yes.
Okay, and I want you to I want you to respond to that question, because it is the ultimate question.
Give me a moment. I'm looking for something, Jeff. Just give me 1 second, if you would. Because this is what we've been talking about since day one of this effort. And I'll put it over here. You
Yeah,
know,
Andy, while you're getting set up, Bob, we have one more comment on this. Bob, why don't you go ahead?
My comments are addressing the current jail population and where we got.
Bob, we can't hear you, Bob. We
Hold
can't hear
on,
you.
hold on.
Addressing the jail population. And we know that there are going to be countervailing variables in place that's going to help us reduce jail population, central booking, diversion, etc. And we don't know what those numbers look like yet, but we know from best practices, those are going to suppress jail population. Nevertheless, we have to identify those things we know that are going to increase jail population that require justice to be done. For example, Mike, as you mentioned, you can't continue to suspend grand jury, right? ODRC will no longer require us to hold for 14 days, require testing on the app. But even when you look at the ODRC situation, there's about 110 inmates in the jail that are awaiting transportation. That represents somewhere between 5 to 7% of the total current jail population. So we need to put that in perspective in terms of the aggregate. There are many other groups, data groups that are driving increased jail population, such as common pleas will going to continue to work on bail cases, right? They are now doing probation violations, and we are not getting them out in 24 hours. We're about to impanel another grand jury that has to be done because we've got cases and potential victims that are awaiting justice. And then I don't want to miss, so those are the big ones, right? So I hate to be the wet blanket, but this 1450 number, if we got down to 1350, right, and maintain that with current best practices, I think that's exceedingly, that's a good thing. And that's consistent with where we want to be based on your original estimates for the jail size. And two, that doesn't take into account what we're going to be able to reduce with central booking and diversion, which are going to come into place. But we can't understate the pressures that will bear when we get back to full court business. Right. And with that, Andrea can talk about the number of courts that are not, we're rotating the amount of court action. So those bail cases are going to start working, et cetera.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. So, right now we have had some limited operations in the court, although we are currently ramping back up our efforts. And Judge Sheehan has worked very hard with all of the judges so that we know we're putting an emphasis on those probation violations. So those hearings are being scheduled very quickly now. We are getting back to trials, like Bob and Prosecutor O'Malley said. We are impaneling 3 more grand juries next week. So all of this will continue to help the backlog, and I think the increased work will also, it will impact the jail population, and I think in a positive way.
When you say a positive way,
I think, no, when I say positive way, I think that we'll start to see and maybe some of those numbers, even though we're going to have increased business, the increased business in the court will also help to get people out of jail.
right. So what I want to say this, and I'm going to turn it over to our folks. And this emphasizes, and if you'll recall, one of the things we talked about extensively, which this emphasizes, is we have to have the ability to have a solution, which does 2 things. It gives us the ability to take advantage of jail population decrease, so we can build small and not spend the first dollar, but with also the ability to have flexibility to expand if we need to. So the key is a flexible approach and not a locked-in approach. We'd never want to build a 2,400 or even a 1,600 person facility if we couldn't downsize it and save. We would never want to build a 2,400 person facility if we have, 1,400 unused beds, but we'd also never want to lock in and build something that could only accommodate 1,200 and then have a huge expense or problem if we had to expand. So flexibility here is the key. Now, having said that, let's have both Curtis and Andy now comment, because the real essence of the question is, are we ready? Do we have enough information right now? And assuming everything Mike says is correct, do we have enough information now to make the judgment as to what is the best solution still? And you guys take it away.
You want to go first, Andy? Or
I think that ultimately what we decide to build is a policy decision on where the system as a group of stakeholders want to go. Since day one in this, we've talked about the importance of population management being the first step in making a decision on jail capacity. That's why we use 1350 as an ADP, or operational capacity, which was a 50% reduction over some of the prior peaks. Now we have lessons learned from COVID. That's why we wanted to do that workshop. Now is the time to make a decision on what the core base number is that we should plan for Cuyahoga County. We can always plan for it to be expanded if necessary, depending on what the solution is, but we do not want to overbuild. I recall there was somebody at an early steering committee.
I want to stop you. Give me a minute. That's not the question. The question is not what is the right number. The question is, even if the right number is 1,100 or 1,200, what is the right solution? Even if you said right now, the right number was 1,200, and just assume that's the right number. The question is, what is the right solution? Would it change the build new versus renovate solution? That's the question.
I do not believe so, because I believe if you get down to 1,200, you even increase your savings, your operational savings, to a higher degree.
In other words,
I would agree. I would agree with Andy, Jeff. I would agree with Andy, despite whatever it winds up being. And I think we need more data, maybe as the next couple of months, to see where things begin to stabilize once COVID begins to go down.
Yep.
We still need to have the new construction, because we will never meet the long-term programmatic goals, nor we will meet the staff efficiencies we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, and what I want to point out, just so it's clear, because I know, because we've been through this, the analysis is actually, if you have a less and less population and got the population down to 900, trying to fit that into your existing facilities, actually, from an operational point of view, it becomes less efficient, because you still have inherent problems you got to build around. You still have a construction cost because it's not big enough. So it's like, it's still going to be a square peg into a round hole when you look at all of the different factors. And I do believe that you could actually, because I've looked at this extensively with you guys, I think what you've shown is the cost of building new and the operational savings become even greater. And that benefit is even greater than the reuse of the existing facilities for smaller population. That is what I think your analysis showed when we went through this. But correct me if I'm wrong, because I want to make sure I'm stating what you're stating properly.
I would agree. I mean, Andy, do you?
I agree. The smaller we build this, the better. The smaller we build it, the less it costs to build and the less it costs to operate. As we said, every housing unit as a base number is
Well, Andy,
is $375,000 in savings a year.
I hate to make you go through this exercise, but I'm wondering this, and here's what I'm wondering. Let's take the assumption. Let's just take the assumption that the number is going to get down to Mike 950. All right, you'll take that as the base low. I would like you, before our, in the next week, to simply take the exact, and it's a number exercise, take the exact same analysis you've done. But instead of basing it on 1,600 to 1,350, base it on whatever that is, 1,150 to 950. I'm not sure what the number is.
It would be 1120.
Okay, take it to 1120 or 1150 to round it off, whatever you want to do, but just then do exactly the same thing you've done before with the side by side, and let's see in the best possible scenario that we can envision for, it's not the best, but the best reasonable solution we can have for population reduction. Let's see how the numbers line up again to make sure that there's not a switch of your rationale here, or a switch of the reasoning. Is that possible to do?
Anything's possible.
No, well, okay, let me say it a different way. Is that something that you can do within the context of what we're doing right now?
I'll have to take a look at what it means in terms of program revision, because that's where we have to start.
By the way, you may find out that you have some red bars on program revision, but I really think that that's ultimately maybe the final, I mean, I think right now, I think we have an impression of what the answer is, but I think that's the final test. Yeah, Mike.
One more comment on the subject is that, as I sit here as an elected official, and
We can't hear.
$500 million. One of the concerns I have is certainly trying to make the right decision. And Curtis, who is on our viewing screen, is that I sit here and that's my best guess that we may be down to 900 or 1,000 or maybe even 800 once we get back to normal. Normal maybe 6 months and maybe 8 months, I don't know. Each one of those numbers, every 100 persons in the jail population, maybe another $30 or $40 million. And it's difficult right now until we know what that stabilization number is. Certainly something has to be done. And on the other hand, I look at kind of like a county.
Yeah, try it again, Mike.
I don't know what else to do.
Yeah, we're not hearing Mike. We're not hearing him.
Can you hear Mike now?
Anything? Can you hear me now?
Hey, Mike, do me a favor. Here, Mike. Oh, what happened? Hold on a minute. No. I think we know what happened here. Just a second. That happened. I realized that he has to hear me now.
I assume you can hear me now, right?
Yeah, we have to mute. Yeah, I'm not on mute. Hold on. Maybe that's the problem. Oh, man. No, that's working. That's working.
Hello?
Everything.
Andrew, can you hear me?
Andy, Andy, can you hear me right now?
Yes.
You can hear me.
Okay.
It has to be, otherwise you get huge feedback. It's been on mute from day one. You get huge feedback. Mike, here's what I'm going to ask you to do.
Hold on. Andrew, can you hear me now?
Andy's on mute, so I wouldn't know. Curtis,
Andrew, wave your hand if you can hear me.
Yes, I hear you better, Mike. I hear you better now.
Okay,
Curtis can hear me.
If you can't, I will be the the lady who
Well,
yells
again,
out again.
what I was saying is that what I have to try to wrestle with is whether that number will be 900 or 1,000 or 1,100 or 1,200. And I don't think, I agree with Curtis that we won't really know until, the next few months shake out and we have all the grand juries back in operation and the court gets back to a normal schedule. And so that's one issue I'm wrestling with. And then the other issue I'm wrestling with is financially, what does this mean to Cuyahoga County? And I assume we have to go out to the debt market. I look at our county compared to our neighboring counties. Our tax rate is the highest in the county as far as our sales tax rate. I mean, it's the highest in the state of Ohio and by far. And does this mean that we have to go back to the taxpayers and get more money? And what does that do to our competitiveness with our neighboring counties? And do we just continue to drive the county to a place where it's not desirable or competitive with its neighboring counties? So there's a lot of issues that go into the equation, and it's not just, are we at 800 or 900 or 1,000? It's just a whole ball of issues that we need to, and I think the first step in that path is certainly getting the reversion center, but also figuring out over the next 2 or 3 months, where does the population fall to once the judges are here every day processing cases, and where do we go? So obviously those are things that are going to happen in the near future that will at least help me make a rational decision is, where do we go as a county, knowing that we need to do something on this issue with the county jail, but also trying to make the best decision for the people who have to pay the bill for it.
Okay, hold on a minute. Armand, let me see. Thank you. Oh, that's Amanda. I'm sorry, I screwed up. There we are. I probably did that before. Armin, you should be able to unmute.
Yep.
And speak. Yep. Go ahead.
One other question I have, and I appreciate.
Oh, wait. Hold on a minute, Armin. Just 1 second. Let's try that again.
Hear you fine.
I certainly appreciate the discussion about the numbers, and I clearly appreciate what the prosecutor and the courts have done to reduce the numbers. Question I have is Prosecutor O'Malley's office is currently handling some ADA issues for us at the jail. And my question is, which we're going to have to make, I believe, in any new facility, or I would assume any renovated facility, some significant changes in the facilities. Has that been calculated in, 1? And 2, would that impact your calculation on the, if we do have to make make physical changes in either a renovated or a new jail 2, or additional jail, would that impact the numbers that you've presented?
I will give you an answer, then I'll let Andy come into it. So keep in mind, when we think about the numbers for the jail, there are 2 levels of numbers. There's a level that is, even if you didn't want to make one programmatic change, even if you didn't want to get one efficiency or do anything else, you're going to spend it anyway, because it's for the deferred maintenance, which you have to deal with. It is for some other issues. You've mentioned one of them. And so there's a level of expenditure you're going to have to go through. And I think, Andy, that was on your one of your initial slides. And I do think that those considerations, well, there's a consideration built in, assuming a certain level is acceptable on ADA. But the answer is you're going to spend that anyway, to answer your question. And of course the problem is, and here's the other point of it, there's a cost of not doing anything, because if you don't do a new or a new programmatic jail, you're still going to pour a ton of money into this facility. And ultimately that expenditure will be of no benefit because it's going to have to be replaced anyway. So it's a timing issue. Mike is completely correct. This would be a lot easier if we had a lot of money. It would be an obvious decision if we had a ready and easy funding source. But do you want to comment on what Armin just said? I don't know why. Oh,
And Andy's on mute.
yeah, I got it. You should be able to unmute, Andy.
Got it. Got it.
Go ahead.
Mr. Bodish, the program anticipated all that would be required for ADA, which means every housing unit has to have ADA capabilities because you can't group those because of different classifications. In other words, if somebody's minimum, they live in a minimum housing unit and have access to accessible fixtures, whether it's sleeping, showers, toilets, visiting, kiosks, tables, etc. We also, when we did the renovation costs for Jail 2 in the downtown option, assumed that we would have to do major changes. We don't know how we're going to do them, but we did build money into the budget because ultimately a project of this scale will be required to meet all current codes, building codes, ADA, accessibility codes. So if there's been major changes to seismic codes, so we built that into the budget because we presume that if we're going to do a renovation of this scope and scale, everything will have to be brought up to current requirements.
So that's in both numbers, both the
Yes.
new build
Yes,
and
sir.
renovating Jail 2.
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
Thank you.
Again, and just to be clear, from a parameter basis, we didn't look at a housing unit and figure out how we're going to make this shower 5 foot wide. That may require, because we just went through this on another major project for Clark County, Nevada, we had to take 2 cells out of every housing unit in order to provide accessible showers and toilets.
Right.
So we built the money into the budget, knowing that there would have to be a solution.
Other questions?
I just wanted to go back some of these, Jeff, you said earlier, which I think is really critical. I mean, given some of the uncertainties about size, is that at least with the new jail on a new site, the flexibility, which Andy talked about earlier, is there for us to contract, expand, go whatever direction we need to go to. That flexibility really becomes almost impossible to do if we stay downtown, even maybe with the annex, maybe, but it's still, there's no flexibility there. It is what it is.
Well, Curtis, I'm going to throw something out which might be bizarre because I've been thinking about Mr. O'Malley's question. If in fact there was a decision that we're going to plan for a reduced capacity, 1,000 beds, and Jail 2 is in play, then we need to think about what would we do just to tear down Jail 1 and rebuild on that site and not spend millions of dollars to acquire an additional site. If we're making a commitment policy-wise about what the jail size should be, what that may mean is we would have to do temporary housing or figure out a way to reduce the population even further. Because we still would need a good central booking release diversion program. We still would need updated medical mental health beds. We would still need all those specialty functions, but it would not make sense, in my estimation, if we're planning for a smaller jail to go buy another site across the street and build a tunnel or a bridge or whatever we need to do. I think it would be a different solution. It would stretch out over time. There'd be costs associated with temporary housing or whatever we would do. But in the end, we'd have an operating facility based on a smaller capacity.
Okay. Andy, let me ask you a question because we've just, as I feared, we're running out of time here. We only have 15 or 17 minutes left.
Okay.
I did want to go on to the polling. Is there anything else documentation-wise you want to present yet?
We should probably give a brief overview of the criteria since that is part of the polling.
Yeah, we have to do that. You're right. Even if we don't do polling today, you know what? We need to do this. So go ahead.
I can do it pretty quickly, Jeff.
Yeah, I only have 7 polling questions. I'm going to just ask people to stick around because it is important to see what people think about it, a little bit of this. So go ahead. So for everyone's benefit, assuming that we are looking to a new site, it's very important, and this committee made it quite clear that while you have confidentiality issues with respect to looking at sites, it was very apparent that we wanted to all have an agreed upon criteria for selection. And so the concept here is come up with agreed upon criteria and an agreed upon scoring system. So we want to talk about what that criteria might and should look like. So go ahead, Andy.
So we broke it into 2 groups of criteria, one locational, one site acquisition and development. Again, one is subjective, one is objective. Our thought will be, for example, access to public transit is very important. If it's there, it's green. If it's in proximity or could be extended, it's yellow. If it's not available, it's red. Parking was identified as a critical criteria if we were looking for a new site. Highway access, we believe, is important because this is a county-wide facility. Is relative to felony arrests, and depending on what we do with diversion and central booking, it may be extended eventually even to misdemeanor arrests. Proximity to the courts, we've heard that from everybody. So we're looking, green would be an 8-mile or 15-minute drive. Yellow would be 12 to 30 minutes, and red, a site that was more than 12 miles or 30 minutes away probably would be rated very low. And again, Jeff, if I'm going through these too fast, you tell me.
No, because here's what I want to do for time-wise. We actually had these conversations with this committee before. You remember we did some polling. This is reflective of what we heard. What we tried to do here is, and we're going to look for your comment on all of these. What we did is we said, this is our view of how it would be scored. We're going to look for your comment between now and the next few weeks to mark it up, say, wait a minute, I think, I think that's, you got to adjust it. Something there that you said was yellow, we think is red, or maybe the miles from the downtown core, we would want to adjust to the time. So I'm just going to suggest right now, we have put this out for everybody. I think this is attached to the agenda. And I'm going to simply ask for everyone, and this is common sense stuff, by the way. The stuff that is not, the stuff you got to get a little bit more into is the developmental impact. But what we're going to ask everyone to do is look at the criteria. And if you think there's something missing that's critical, I was going to do this by polling it, don't have time. But if you think there's something that's critical that is not in that criteria or has to be added, or it should be a description, I'm going to ask everybody by return email to me to get me any comments or thoughts or discussion on what they might modify or change. And I'm not asking for wordsmithing. I mean, these are material changes, things that you really think are critical, because there is going to be a scoring, there is going to have to be sites identified, and they do have to be scored. And there's going to have to be accountability to this committee, assuming we go down the direction of going to a new site for a jail. And by the way, once again, this is for planning purposes. No one has ever, and I'll say this to Mike, this is how we continue to plan. We're not pulling the trigger on anything. We're going through the planning process to see where it comes out to, because at the end of the day, there are just a whole series of triggers that still have to be, you got to make sure, as I've said, there's got to be the agreements with the county. There's got to be the suitable site. There's got to be a determination of what funding and financing actually costs versus savings. All this stuff is down the road.
Jeff?
Yes, sir.
I just want to point out that, and I just had a discussion with them, and I can bring more, is that this pandemic has also illustrated to the court and to the prosecutor's office, but in particular the court, how much more can be done via video, where the necessity to have the building immediately adjacent to the courthouse is not as serious a requirement as it was 6 months ago. And I think it's really opened many people's eyes, the ability to video conference both pleas, probation violation hearings, arraignments, and everything else has completely changed in the last 6 months.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the conversations we had about this. And obviously that will, even if you were remote, it would greatly reduce transportation costs. The more you can do it. And that's an important investigation also, which we'll continue on. Okay, let's do this. Let's take just to see where this goes. I'm going to go to the polling. Is that okay with you, Andy?
I stopped my share. The screen is yours, Jeff.
All right, hold on a minute. Let me. I'm going to do something here. I hope we don't have a glitch here. Hold on. Here's what we're doing. You'll see what we're doing. Give me 1 second. It'll be. We've done this before where I find out what the steering committee votes and I find out what everybody does just for sense of the meeting, so people are included. That's what we did last time. Hold on a minute now. Wait a minute. I got to take the screen back. Oh, okay. Hold on. I'll go to that first. Who's trying to comment? Okay, I'll go to Rhonda. Just give me 1 second to make sure this is set up. Are you now all seeing a slide that starts with your participation as requested?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. So first of all, let me just do one thing. Rhonda, you had a comment, so let's go to your comment and then we'll quickly do the polling. You can unmute. Go ahead, Rhonda.
Okay, can you hear me now?
We can.
Yes.
All right. So I had different comments at different times, but regardless, I can appreciate the efforts that were made back in April to reduce the population. I understand and we navigate through the challenges associated with DRC and transfers to there. I will say in the discussion with Metro Health this morning, there is a caution that was relayed to me that there's probably going to be another sweep of COVID that comes through. So we're planning and we'll work through that regardless. There are so many challenges associated with the structure here. There's the ability for inmates to communicate through intercoms, which are virtually non-existent. The staffing issues that Curtis and Andy have already spoken about, so I won't elaborate on that. It is a virtual money pit, all the work that would need to be done. And in some instances, I'm not sure that you can still achieve minimum jail standards on a couple matters. Natural light is one. There are a couple units that I'm not sure that you can achieve natural light in those. That's a jail standard. We still would continue to have concerns about emergency evacuation during the May 30th riots. Huge concern about what happens if a fire starts on the first floor of the building. The inmates all have to go down to go over that are above the fourth floor. And you would have virtually the same situation if you build another building that attaches to jail 2. So for what it's worth, I just wanted to throw that out there. And we are doing our best with what we have. And I would just highly recommend to at least consider moving forward with the new jail facility. And then we can work through the number of beds, because that gives us some months to work through all the programming that is currently in process, and the courts would be more back in operation so we could gauge where the population's going to go. I just hate to stall these activities on a let's wait and see what we're going to do. I think that a lot of it can be still accomplished moving forward of a decision. And then as Curtis and Cheryl get more data that they've asked for this week, we can continue to look at that. So I'm not necessarily proposing for a larger or smaller number. I'm just proposing for a building that would better meet our needs, create better conditions for inmates as well as for the staff and visitors. So for what it's worth, I'm sorry, I just needed to make it.
Fine, and we thank you. You're obviously, the rest of us observe the facility. You are there, you operate it, you live with it, and you would know it, your groups know it better than anyone.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to do some quick polling. This is for what it's worth, polling. So the first question, if you are a member of the steering committee, hit yes. And by the way, if you know that you're a delegate, if you know that your member's not here, but you're here in their place, hit yes. This is pretty interesting because, excuse me? I'm sorry. No, I didn't. Got a chat comment? Oh, man. I have too many screens here open and I lost my chat. Where is it? Oh, here it is. Yes, you can send your, yeah, this is not a big deal. Let me just tell you, this is a sense of the group. This is just to see what people are thinking. This is not a determination. It's just to see what people are thinking. And the reason I know that, it's just a sense of the group. Hold on a minute. I just screwed up by putting that there. Second question, and I'll go back to the first one. What is your primary affiliation? Are you with the court, judge or staff, for the county, judge or staff for the municipal court? And when I say for the county, that's all three. That's any county court. Are you affiliated with Cuyahoga County other than the court or court staff? So any other employee or any other person who's part of the county system, or number 4, the city system, other than court, a municipal court or staff. Are you another agency involved in the criminal justice system in any capacity? Or are you other?
Jeff, your PowerPoint is not moving. It's still on the first screen. It's not showing the result with the questions.
Okay, hold on. Let me see what's going on.
You think you just need to page down in PowerPoint?
Well, actually, it's working here.
We don't see it on the screen.
We still see that your participation is requested screen, Jeff. I just wanted you to know.
That's you. It's not me.
You can see the answers on the left-hand side of the mini
Oh, wait a
slides.
minute. People are responding to the question, so they must be seeing it. You're seeing it on the app.
Yes.
Okay, hold on a minute.
What I'm seeing on the screen is non-presentation mode. The small slides to the left, but still the first slide in the main screen. Curtis, is that what you see also?
Exactly, Andy. Yeah. Need to go to presentation mode.
Why isn't it advancing? Because that's just my first slide. Okay, let's do this though. Here's what we're going to do. If you can see it on the application, do you know what I'm doing wrong here? I'm screen sharing. Clicking a PowerPoint is what you're in.
This is PowerPoint and the presentation.
Yeah, hold on a minute. Let me just see one thing. Let me advance it. Let's just see if it advances.
There we go.
Yes, okay, just advanced, yes.
All right, that's fine. I'll go back to the first slide. Okay, in a minute. So everyone's voted on your primary affiliation now. You've all seen this, okay? So here's where you're affiliated. Most of you are county staff. And you can see the responses there. Next slide. So here's the question. This is really, now this is planning. Conditions at the county jail warrant that we proceed with the planning of a new or renovated jail now. Simply addressing deferred maintenance issues is not sufficient. So the one choice would be that we just continue to deal with deferred maintenance. Are we at the point right now where we believe that the conditions at the jail warrant that we proceed with this planning process, whatever it is? I'll get into what it is, but do we have to keep moving forward? One more second. Going once. Getting a few more responses in. Still have a nice number of people who are responding. That's good. Okay, I'm going to call the question. I'll still get some more responses. Okay. Here's a fair sampling of the response. 93% agree that we need to continue to move forward on the planning process. Okay. I'm not allowed to know the individual. No. We're into between 30 and 40 who are still with us because it's after the noon hour. Bill, I was the only one who said no because this is getting overwhelming for me. No. Go ahead. Don't laugh at that. Next. Now, this is the steering committee previously determined that a new or renovated jail should be designed to house 1,600 individuals, expanded to 2,400. While the numbers may change during the ongoing planning process based on information that has been presented to me or which I am aware, here's one of 4 choices right now. I believe those population numbers continue to be reasonable for planning purposes. I believe those numbers should be reduced at this time. That means based on the information we have now, I believe those numbers should be increased at this time, or I have no opinion on this issue. Based on the information you have right now, what's your impression? And that's at this time. Obviously, in the planning process, we'll modify it as we go through the process. By the way, I'm not showing you the steering committee responses. I'm showing the responses of everybody. Because frankly, we have some members of the steering committee who aren't here, and it's just not fair to show a partial response to the steering committee right now. Okay. We actually have more responses on this one than last one. Pardon? The way Trump would do it is I already have the answers built into the system. This is a public meeting, isn't it? I've given away my politics. I'm sorry. Okay. This is interesting. About 56% say they're reasonable. 41% think they should be reduced. Interesting. We have at least one person here who thinks they should be increased right now. Let's go on. Nobody has no opinion. That's good, actually. All right. Now, this is where you push the number. You're going to take these 6 things and push the first thing, your most important consideration first, your second most important consideration. So just very quickly, rank these considerations for future development of the county jail in order of what's a priority for you right now. Making sure that whatever we do, number 1, safe, humane, and constitutionally compliant conditions of confinement, reducing annual operating cost, minimizing capital investment, accessibility to families and legal counsel, improving intake central booking, or immediate accessibility to the courts. And by that, I'm talking about proximity, being next to the courts, not by not by transportation, not by video. So rank them. So the one that you think is your highest priority, the number one thing, push in first, and then push in the next one, and the next one, and the next one. So take a minute and think about it. Your highest priority you hit first, and your second priority you hit second. You're a data guy. You're a data guy, right? Oh, you demonstrated to him how to do it by voting. That's great. Okay. All right. First, you're going to actually prioritize all six. The one you think is the highest, put in first. The second you think is second, put in second. Right now. So you can put in 6 numbers right now. Just put them in the order of priority. So you learn from a guy who actually didn't understand what to do. So, but no, I can go ahead. Put them in order of priority. This is called a forced ranking. And once again, it's just there's no right or wrong answers. It's just a, okay, we set to go here? We need 1 minute for someone here. We'll take another minute. I'm not sure. My lesson learned is next time I do this, I have to have multiple screens myself. Having the multiple screens up there doesn't work. We're learning how to do this better, and I apologize to those who are trying to chat and log in, because my problem is I'm working off a single screen and I actually have to manipulate 2 screens to do this properly. So that's my lesson learned. I've always done this from home or my office where I have the 2 screens. And here, all right, here we go. And what this is so the way this would be, the reason you have 280 is it's like a number 1 is like 10 points and number 2 is like 8 points. But what you see here is safe, humane, and constitutionally compliant conditions is the number 1 consideration. Improving central booking and intake is the second one. The third one is reduced annual operating cost. The fourth one is accessibility to families and legal counsel. The last one, by the way, is accessibility to the courts, which of course is the advantage to having several of the judges not here while you do the ranking. That's where this is. Sorry, Andrea, but it's a fact. Next question. Okay. Now this is sort of an ultimate question today. The existing Cuyahoga County Jail should be replaced with a new low-rise campus facility located outside of the downtown Cleveland Business Core, but on a site selected in accordance with the appropriate site criteria. I'm going to leave out the second sentence. The second sentence, the jail should be designed for, because if you agree that it should be off-site, but maybe 1,500 beds, still say yes to this one, or strongly agree. So I'm going to leave the number out, leave the 1,600 beds out of this equation, okay? It's the first sentence. Do you right now believe, and this is really the ultimate question, are we going to continue to consider options for renovating the existing building, or are you right now of the belief it should be replaced with a low-rise campus like what you see? What's your present thinking? It could change, but what's your present thinking? For a couple more responses here. Going once, got a couple more. Okay, I think I'm going to call the question. We've got 30 some responding. Okay, so we have one that disagrees. We have 80, 90% either strongly agree or agree. So that's a pretty good consensus. But now here's the next question. It's the same question, eliminate the issue of the beds. But do you think, and by the way, this doesn't mean we're not going to get more information for you, Mike, for everybody, but do you think you have enough information so that we can narrow future planning to this option now? I understand that we may need to do the additional study to confirm it, to bring it down to size, but do you think in your mind that you have enough information so that we can narrow this option now? Because I do, and I'll be blunt, I do want to put this to a steering committee vote at the next meeting. Before that, I'm going to talk about that. It's going to be in November, in the first couple of weeks of November. I think we could do it on election day, but maybe not. Well, we don't. We'll talk about the scheduling. We will talk about scheduling. The only thing that's going to take time with it is that one reevaluation. But I get it, and we may just have a very brief meeting just for the determinations, but we can talk about that. Okay, let's get through this question. I do want to. Okay, so right now, this is interesting. This is interesting because 100% agree they have enough information in aero planning at this point in time. That I am surprised, but hey, okay, these guys aren't focusing on what just came up though. I just want you to know that. All right, next, maybe I shouldn't focus on. Next question. All right. I just want you, and here's all you do. These are 10 criteria for scoring. Every one of these that you think is an appropriate criteria, punch it in. So you can punch 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I think it's 0 for 10 into your thing if you think all 10 are. But I want you to punch in every one of these criteria that you think is an important material criteria. And so if there's something here that you think is not the primary criteria, don't punch it in. But these are the major criteria that we have identified. You don't have to rank them. No ranking, that'll take too long. Just if you think it's important and critical, punch it in. What we're going to see is if there's some criteria here that not very many people think is important. Now, but the other exercise is not for right now, is what are the other criteria? I think this is the last question, by the way. There may be one more. I think this may be it. So if you think these are important criteria, punch them in. And if there's something here you don't think is important, don't punch it in. For example, number 6, some of you may not think having the site, you know, if it's just so you know, the site that's capable of doing the jail is probably 15 acres. The site that's capable of doing a jail and a courthouse is probably 30 acres. And that would be number 6. Okay, and we'll see what people say here. Oh, I'm sorry. No. Thank you, Mike. Okay, and there you see how people voted. And by the way, there were 23, well, I guess 22 or 23 people voting. And this is interesting. You can see what people thought was critical and what people thought was less critical. And you'll get all this information. Once again, it's 23 people who randomly are at the end of this meeting because we're way over. So you know, for what it's worth. We'll probably do something like this in more detail later. And so the discussion is what important criteria is missing and what are your greatest concerns regarding site selection. So with that in mind, I'm going to tell you we're 20 minutes over. We obviously don't have time for a comment, for further comment right now. Here's our next steps, Andy. We are going to talk, I'm going to pull the steering committee members. I'm going to pull you, our consultant group, and the steering committee members. We want to see how quickly we can re-engage. We will talk about doing some of this initial information, but we also want to get started with working groups, because today we focused on the jail, but the other thing is we're going to return to the courts, and we're going to return to the court issue. Andy?
Jeff, if I may, I think our next step would be any of the stakeholders that would like to have a working group on the presentation to share it as a basis for having better understanding for determination. We will be available to do that. And then we'll be setting up a separate schedule for restarting our work on the courts.
Okay. Thank you. And by the way, I know Andy wants to thank everyone. I want to thank everyone. This has been a very difficult, it's a difficult time for everyone. It's a difficult process to put this back together. We really had a lot of great participation today. We had at times over 80 people who showed an interest and were here for most of the meeting. I apologize it ran over. But I do think there's a lot of interest in moving this process forward one way or the other. These are difficult questions. We have a team that's dedicated to getting the answers and doing this in the most efficient way. So thank you, everybody. And we will be reaching out to individual steering committee members, talking about any individual meetings to go through the information on jails in particularly, and then we're going to start the agenda for where we go next on the courts. Because once again, and I will tell you, and I'm just going to tell you something about the courts. And what that is we're going to have to figure out how to pare down the courts program, because right now we have a courts program which is very, very, there's a lot in it. It's an expensive program. In light of the economy, we're going to have to figure out how to do that efficiently. The one thing about jails is we can get a lot of operational savings in the jails. Operational savings in the courts more difficult. So we're going to have to figure that out. Bill, did you have? Yes.
Shorter meetings with any group that wants to have reacclimated with let's set a date and a time now, like 2 weeks from now, where you cut it off, and let's have a meeting before Halloween again to re-address these issues. I don't think we're pushing too hard. We've been through this process. I'm of the opinion that we need to start making decisions moving forward.
I agree. But what I'd like to do, the only thing I'd like to do, I'd like to give my consultants the courtesy of at least getting their calendars. So Bill, let me commit to getting that done within the next, by trying to get that arranged by next Tuesday, let's say. Okay, and we'll see what the art of the possible is. Okay, thank you. Andy, any concluding comment from you?
No, just thanks to everybody for the participation, and we look forward to continuing the process.
Thank you, everybody.
All right, thanks everyone. We're going to conclude the meeting then. Appreciate it.